Thank you, Chair. We're live on YouTube, so I'll hand over to you to start.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening and welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual consultative. Good evening and welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual consultative group. I'll start again. Good evening and welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual consultative scrutiny meeting on the 2nd of December 2021. I am the Chair, Councillor Tom Wright. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. I would like to remind you all that the Council has recently delegated much of the decision taking to senior officers until the 17th of January 2022 due to concerns around COVID. Consequently, this will be a consultative meeting only. We will adhere as much as possible to the procedural rules detailed in the Constitution. However, where the meeting would have normally decided a matter, it will now make a recommendation to the appropriate officer. The officer will then take that recommendation into account when making their decision. Where the meeting is making onward recommendations, for example, to Council, Cabinet or another committee, this will happen in the normal way. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or to silent. As this consultative scrutiny meeting is dependent on internal connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we have not been able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made, and do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic hand and wait to be called. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members present. Can you please now unmute your microphone, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Our Democratic Services Officer, Sarah, will now do the roll call of committee members. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Allen.
Yes, I'm present, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm present, and thank you for changing my name.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Present, Sarah.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor McCollum.
Present, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parr.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pepper. No. Councillor Ranger.
I think she's given apologies, Sarah.
Present.
Oh, you are here.
Yeah, she's literally just joined. Thank you, Councillor Ranger. Councillor Rylance.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Tom Wright.
Thank you, present, Sarah.
Thank you. The meeting's quorate, Chair.
And did I just hear that Val has joined us?
Yes, she has.
That's good. Welcome. Agenda item 1 is public speaking. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak?
No, we have no members registered, Chair.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting. If anyone has on the set of minutes from the 7th of October 2021, please do this by raising your electronic hand. If I have no hands raised, I will take this as an indication that you're all happy that minutes are accepted. I see no hands raised, so those minutes are accepted. Item 3, Sarah, please, apologies.
Thank you. We have apologies from Councillor Coleman.
Thank you.
And Chair, before we carry on, there's some Councillor Kemp has put apologise. Councillor Kemp, I didn't call his name out. He's a member of the Scrutiny Committee.
Oh. Did you say he's here or he's not here? He's
Yes, he is here. Yes, sorry,
right.
Councillor Kemp, apologies.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is declarations of interest. When your name is called, please state your declaration, including which agenda item your decision relates to. If it is a personal or prejudicial declaration, and state what exactly that interest is, please. Sarah, please.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
None at all, Sarah.
Thank you. Councillor Bruce.
None at all, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yes, Sarah, personal and prejudicial. Goodmore's Farm is coming up. It's been on my radar for 8 years now. I've had lots of interaction with the public on it. So I'm being hit always on this one. So as long as you know.
Excuse me, Maddie, did you say it was prejudicial as well?
Well, yes, because I'm a member of the council. And I have in the past spoken to the developer, which was 8 years ago as well. So I'm covering all ends, if you like.
Well, if you're prejudicial, it limits your participation on the agenda. You're not receiving any financial benefit or any.
No. I just want to make clear that I've had contact with everyone on this issue.
Well, that's fine. I don't think that counts as prejudicial. Can DSO help me on that? I don't think it does.
Sarah, shall I comment? Councillor Chapman, if you declare it as prejudicial, then you will need to leave the meeting for the time that item is discussed.
Well, I'm not getting any financial benefit out of it.
No, so in which case it is your call,
Private.
but it's probably not prejudicial or pecuniary. You may wish to consider whether your previous involvement means that you are predetermined in a particular way, in which case it might be sent. Are you intending to take part in the debate?
Yes, because I called it because I wish to flag up some of the things of concern, bearing in mind this council is going forward with the local plan. There were some things that in this development, although we cannot change the outcome, I know that's all decided, but a lot of things
we can decide all
question.
that. We can decide all that through in the item, Maddie. But from what you say, you do not have a prejudicial interest, because if you have, when that item is discussed, you'll have to leave the meeting.
Yeah, well, we'll stick to private.
So personal interest, but Councillor Chapman, I would just suggest you consider whether your previous interactions might mean that you don't come to it with an open mind, and you would just need to consider if that's the case. But I'll leave you to think about it, as Councillor Wright suggests, up until the item.
Can I discuss this with you before the item comes up?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was the one that brought this forward for scrutiny because of the public unrest. That's why I brought it forward. Yeah. So I would like to flag up to my colleagues, which I have put on the form, that I didn't say what outcome I expected. I expect it to be discussed by my colleagues on scrutiny. I would just like to put forward what problems that I see have arisen during the 8 years previous to this.
Mm-hmm. So I think as long as you're content that you come to the matter with an open mind, then that's fine. As long as, and I think it's helpful to have considered that as we have done now. So if that's your view, then that's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Had we finished the list of
Chair, No, I haven't yet.
May I make a comment on that, please?
In what respect?
In that, I think the either the current landowner or the former landowner of Goodmore's Farm was a contributor to political party.
Well, many people are donators to political party, but as long as Councillor Chapman did not herself receive any financial or other benefit, tangible benefit, I don't think she's disqualified by that. But thank you for pointing that out to us. Anyway, we'll now move on to. Sorry, Sarah, did you say you've gone through every? How many other members?
No, we've got to finish the rest of the committee, Chair. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Yeah, also with reference to item 9, I'm an Exmouth Town Councillor, but not for that ward, and I don't have the same history as Maddie does. I am, however, a member of Planning Committee which considered the application, and I'm also a member of Strategic Planning, but I don't think I need to declare other committees on East Devon, so it's only the personal interest as an Exmouth Town Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
No, nothing.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I'm not sure. Again, on number 9, regarding Octomore Lane, obviously I'm a Hodden Town Councillor and I'm an EDC Councillor for St Paul's Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
None, thankfully. Thank you.
Councillor Parr.
None, thank you.
Councillor Pepper is not here. Councillor Ranger.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
None, thank you.
And Councillor Wright. Thank you.
None, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, agenda item 8, matters of urgency, and at this time I'm not aware of any. Is that still the position, Sarah?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Item 6, confidential exempt items. Again, I'm not aware of any. Is that still the state?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Agenda item 7, decisions made by Cabinet, including portfolio holders called in by members for scrutiny in accordance with the overview and scrutiny procedure rules. I don't think there are any of those. That's correct, is it?
That is correct, yes, Chair.
Agenda item 8, portfolio holders update on the progress with the member development working group. And I think we have Councillor Sarah Jackson here to bring us up to date on that matter. Am I correct?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, we had our initial meeting of Member Development Working Group for quite a long time. And we initially considered the minutes from the previous group, which was a little over, I think it was 5th of February 2020. It's quite a while ago. And feeding out from there, we took a number of subjects into consideration around things like reviewing the post-election welcome sessions and induction training, what we felt could be improved, matters around things like attendance and ways to promote that, around what training needed to be mandatory, what training we might want to include as top-up training or training for those who've been elected mid-term. We delved into quite a few different elements of that in terms of how we might identify where there's gaps in training that are required as well, and how we deliver training in a way that isn't overload for people moving forward, looking at things like forward planning and scheduling, and creating a sort of a matrix so that people can factor those things in to their plans if they're running for election, but also midterm, so they know what the ongoing top-up training schedule might look like. So from that meeting. Really great discussion. We had also members who weren't part of the group who came and contributed. Very grateful for that. Really constructive. Some of our newest councillors as well contributed, which was invaluable, I think, because they're the only ones of us who have been in a position where they're trying to learn the ropes remotely and in this sort of more digital environment, whereas we all were lucky to have the induction programme that was in place. So off of the back of that, we're now looking to have another meeting in the new year, and Henry and Sue from Democratic Services are going to be looking at pulling together a matrix of the training that's due to be offered, along with some questions that we want to put out to the wider membership around all matters training, to try and identify where there might be gaps, and get feedback from the wider membership. So it's not just a small group of people feeding in. You know, we've all got our individual experiences of how training is conducted, what works for us, what doesn't, but it's important that we get a broader picture. So we'll be looking to do that moving forwards, and that's going to help us in planning the next lot of induction training. We have around about a year to pull together the next programme in time for the next cohort. And then amongst that, we also need to be looking at the ongoing development of our current cohort. So there's sort of several strands running concurrently together. There's also, we've sort of set a very loose forward plan at the moment. I'm expecting that will develop in time as well, around current training requirements that we need to pick up, things like safeguarding training, and other issues around staff member protocols, those sorts of things. So that's sort of forming now. We're getting into a position where, especially once we get the feedback from the survey as well, we should have a good base to set a proper forward plan. And I anticipate that the Member Development Working Party is going to be meeting quite regularly in order to progress this a little bit faster, because we've had such a big gap. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to take those.
Yes, Sarah, can I just make one point? I sit on the licensing committee, which means sitting on the licensing subcommittee. And I think sometimes members who put themselves forward for committees are not really aware of the absolute legal requirement for training, nor exactly how onerous that training can be. And I'm just wondering if the training can also include training for those who actually appoint people to committees. So that in fact would probably be group leaders, because I sometimes think when they are making their suggestions for appointments, some of them who might not be aware of the difficulties that is given, because I know in this case, for a number of meetings, there are only about 3 or 4 of us who were sufficiently trained to sit on the subcommittee, which put an unfair burden on those of us who were able to do it. So I think what you've said is very encouraging, and I wish you well with it. But I think that is one point, certainly for planning and licensing, there's an absolute legal requirement for members of those committees to have received training before they can adjudicate. Anyway, that's all I want to say. I'll leave it to Sarah to see if anyone else has a hand raised. Sorry, that's my Sarah Jing.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Miller, followed by Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, Sarah Jackson, for what she's done with Member Development Working Party, and the very, very good meeting that she chaired that I attended, not being a formal member of the group. 2 key points that I took away from it, and I wasn't able to make it for the entire meeting, was a discussion over what actually should be mandatory. And I just wanted to ask Councillor Jackson whether there'll be anything coming forward quickly on safeguarding being mandatory, because I understand that is an area of public concern, understandably. I don't know what I don't think there should be any rush in making that a mandatory training option for us all, for the public to know that we've all undertaken, as I have. So the second point, which is linked, was I recalled a discussion, and the monitoring officer supported the idea of all of that mandatory training and optional training then being published on the council website as another encouragement for all members to actually undergo the training necessary, so they could be held to account where necessary for not doing so. And I think, Chair, you made a good point about licensing. I'd like to reiterate that there just hasn't been enough take up there. It is a very complex legal area that does require a lot of training. But I think those two things that I've just mentioned, things that, I mean, I appreciate the matrix is something that's going to take a long time or longer, and is for the working party to discuss, but the two changes that could be made fairly quickly would be making sure there's a record publicly, and secondly, on the deciding and determining which parts of training we think should be mandatory through our code of conduct. So again, those are the two areas I thought were the most interesting, and I appreciate any comments Councillor Jackson has to make on those things. Thank you.
If I may, Chair. Oh,
Sorry, certainly, Sarah, yes.
Yeah, thank you. All really good points, and they were all things that were discussed at the meeting as well. There was, as you quite rightly laid out, that there are legal statutory requirements for training on certain committees, and it was picked up that there is a difference between those sorts of training that are required in order for you to sit and contribute to things like licensing subcommittee, and I've been in a similar situation to yourself, where I was one of a smaller number of people who'd actually undertaken that training when I sat on that committee myself. And then statutory training, mandatory training, which is deemed as critical by the membership for things, say safeguarding as an example, and that in itself is nuanced, because there's certain training which currently falls into our constitution that we have laid out that we must do, and then there's training that everyone's saying yes we must do, but it's not written into our constitution. So there's sort of layers of this, and that's something that we do need to unpick. And I know it's something that standards will be considering as well, as they're looking at things like the code of conduct. I know these are conversations that are happening elsewhere too, so I expect those conversations to continue. In terms of training records being published, again, this is something that's come up in member development, and I know it's been discussed in other committees as well. I think of the mandatory training, there's sort of a general consensus that it would be a good idea to have that available, but at the same time we need to tackle it in a sensitive way, because we need to give people the opportunities to do those training sessions as well, and that might be impacted by how those training sessions are delivered. So for example, we've got various different vehicles of training. It might be that we conduct a session with someone giving a training session that's interactive, and it's very easy to identify if someone attended and did the work. Equally, we could do a session where you log on to our existing online training portal. You can do the session, and it won't let you progress and complete the session until you've gone through all of the steps. And at that point, there is again a record. But there may be situations where there's training that must be conducted, and there's resources in order for someone to sit in front of a video or a recording or a presentation, but actually there's no way to prove that they did that training. So there's things that we need to unpick in order to enable us to keep those records. And certainly we don't want to disadvantage any members that haven't had the opportunity to do that training because we haven't made it available to them. So there's lots of elements of that we need to do. There was one, and responsibility, you're absolutely right. When it comes down to our wider membership, we have a responsibility as individuals to undertake top-up training when it's available, and also ensure that the members who we are putting forward to various committees or are standing on those committees have the capacity to go and do the training in order to do those to take on those responsibilities in an effective way. So it's, I think, one of the elements to this whole project is ensuring that we all understand that as elected members, we continue to undertake training, even if we were elected terms and terms ago. Things change. We need to remind ourselves about some of the stuff that's critical for us doing our jobs.
Any other speakers?
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm having some internet issues. I will kill my video in the hope that you can still hear me.
We can.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. Apologies for the internet there. Sarah, thank you for your comprehensive update. I just wanted, again, touch on the topic of the mandatory training. One of the points I was going to ask is what's being done to increase this, but I think you've already provided that answer, so thank you. I did also want to just, I think, point out that if it's mandatory training, it becomes an area of a policy that exists that isn't being followed. So I was wondering if there should be an update on where we are to the Audit and Governance Committee on that ground. But I've noted your comment is also that the Standards Committee is potentially looking at that. So rather than try and duplicate effort at this stage, I think I'll talk to the chair of the Standards Committee, just find out what they're looking at to make sure there's not a duplication, but there might be a follow-up report just to understand what numbers we're fully looking at in terms of compliance with a policy there. I think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins, if you wouldn't mind, I'd quite like to attend that, if that's okay, just so that I'm fully across, where we're at between those two, because I'm not always available to attend Audit and Governance and Standards as well. So it would be good to ensure that what's discussed between yourselves ends up fed through member development as well, and it's picked up more comprehensively.
Yeah, of course, that's fine.
Thank you.
No, I don't see any other speakers' hands raised. Thank you, Sarah, for your up-to-date report, and I'm impressed with the work and the breadth of the work you're doing. I think it must be part of this scrutiny function to ensure that before we have the new council running in 2023, that you, and I think it would also need checking by standards and by governance, that there is a comprehensive, clearly understood, set down training policy and strategy. And I feel it would not be inappropriate for us to expect that, if you like, composite report explaining exactly what the procedures will be to come before this committee before the end of 2022, so that we can be assured that going forward in 2023, we'll be in a much better position with regard to training old, new and existing councillors. Would the committee agree with that we look together with Sarah to set a date towards the end of next year? I see nodding heads.
That was good, Chair.
If I may, there is one factor that needs to be taken into account. I mean, in order to set this, it needs to be done in advance of the financial budget for that year, because obviously there will be financial implications. So it will have to be in place at that stage. Perhaps I can just ensure that it comes to you at the earliest opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah. I was being generous, giving you a long deadline. If you want to shorten your deadline, I'm all in favour of that. Certainly if we say by the autumn of 2022, which should give us time for it to be approved and included in the budget in the following February.
If I may, can I seek advice from the monitoring officer who knows exactly what the timescales need to be for delivery of the induction training programme?
Thank you. And Sarah, Jenkins, it's very complicated. Can you make a note of that, Sarah, to make sure that we are in a position to reconsider this in a timely manner?
Yes, I have, Chair. Thank you.
Well, if there's nothing else, I'd like to thank you, Sarah, for your work on this and encourage you to continue as you're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair, with apologies to yourself and the committee, I'm going to have to leave now, if that's okay.
Thank you, Alistair. Enjoy your next meeting.
Thank you.
Right, we now move on to agenda item 9, the local plan sites allocation and delivery. I think this is very much in line with Maddie's proposal, and I think we have an officer report. Sarah, is that correct?
Yes, Chair. Ed Freeman's in the meeting to report.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. So this report relates to a proposals form that has been said was put forward by Councillor Maddie Chapman back in April of this year. And members at that time considered the proposals form and resolved that I should bring a report to Scrutiny Committee setting out how the allocations within the local plan come to fruition through the planning process and how policies in the local plan are translated into the delivery of a development. It was quite clear in the recommendation that references to specific sites, particularly the Goodmoors Farm site that Councillor Chapman had raised, should be used as examples only, because it's not the role of the Scrutiny Committee to look at specific planning decisions. So just make that point at the outset. So what I've tried to do is draw out what I think is the key issue here, which is one of how viability testing is done in relation to allocations in the local plan and then carried through into the application process. And just use Goodmoors Farm and a further example at Ottery Moor Lane in Honiton to illustrate the issue, which to my mind is fundamentally that when we were doing the now adopted local plan, viability testing requirements were much looser in terms of government guidance. And it was very much about quite generic testing of viability across different types of development and different broad locations, rather than specific viability testing of specific sites and specific proposals, I suppose. And this generated a problem not just in East Devon but nationally, whereby this generic testing would lead to an understanding in terms of what a development could deliver in terms of infrastructure and policy requirements being set on that basis. And then when planning applications are made, these issues are then looked at in much more detail. There's much more information about the site and the likely costs of delivering that site that then lead to a much greater level of understanding, and all of those assumptions that were made at the allocation stage sort of go out the window, and you're presented with a whole different picture of what the site can deliver, which then means, unfortunately, that it's often meant that they can't then meet the policy expectations and the expectations that have been set out that the community are expecting the site to deliver. And so in response to this issue, I think the government made some changes to the National Planning and Policy Framework a couple of years ago now, which basically talks much more about doing site-specific testing, particularly of large-scale allocations in terms of viability, and this then setting a benchmark in terms of what the site should be achieving and delivering, against which the application should be, any viability at the planning application stage should be assessed. So you're essentially not coming at it with a clean slate when it comes to the planning application stage. The viability is tested against what was the position at the time of allocation, and we should only then be making departures from policy where changes in circumstances that have happened since allocation lead to the viability having declined since that time. So I think that's quite a key change in terms of government guidance, which will hopefully help to address this issue moving forward in terms of how we do the viability work in terms of the new local plan, and making sure certainly on key large-scale strategic allocations that we do more detailed testing of viability issues. Indeed, some members may be aware we now have an officer in my team who is an expert in doing viability work, and it will obviously be helping us with doing that work. And then obviously, as that then moves forward to allocation stage, any assessment done at allocation stage will be done on a different basis and measured against that benchmark set at the allocation stage. So hopefully we can have much more success in achieving the aspirations that are set in the local plan when they come through the planning application process. So hopefully that's just a quick run through the report. I won't go into the specific examples, although I'm happy to take any questions on the case studies I've cited. But hopefully those changes in terms of government guidance and approach to viability testing will at least help to address the concerns that were raised. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ed. Are there any questions? And I just want to stress what Ed said. Well, I think to sum it up in simple words, we hope we have learned lessons from things that have happened in the past, and that the new framework and the employment of a new viability expert should do something to try and ease these problems going forward. But that's all I want to say. Any questions for Ed, please?
Chair, Councillor Rylance has a hand up, followed by Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Will you call them in that order then, please, Sarah? Thank you.
Yes.
Is that me then? Could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I can't. Okay, so my question to Ed is this: so, have you got any indication about what sort of scale of change of circumstance would in future warrant a reassessment of the viability? I mean, are we talking, discovery of a nuclear arms dump, or are we saying that they can say that, their costs have got away with them? I mean, do we have any idea of what sort of circumstance would lead to them being able to apply for a change of a reassessment? That's my question.
Chair, would you like me to respond to that straight away?
Yes, please, Ed. Sorry, yeah, we respond to questions as they're asked.
I mean, it's something that's being shaped by case law and appeal decisions as we move forward from the change in the guidance coming in. I mean, fundamentally, it's got to be something that we weren't aware of at allocation stage. So I guess the onus is on us to get the information we need to reassure ourselves that we've got a good level of information to make an informed judgment at allocation stage, such that there should be no surprises coming forward further down the road.
Does that satisfy you, Eleanor? Right, I think it's Kathy next.
Yes, thank you. I've got two questions, if I may. First one, this new viability examination for the local plan at the beginning, is that only done by us? Because that sounds like it is going to involve an awful lot of work.
Yeah, so we've always had to do a viability assessment of the plan. As I say, the guidance has changed in terms of how we do that and perhaps how much detail we do in that. But yes, it is a large piece of work. I don't think it's something we would do in-house entirely. I think it's important to have the viability expertise we have in-house involved in terms of sort of looking at allocations at the early stages and making decisions about what we allocate. But ultimately we'll have to get external consultants to do an entire plan viability assessment, looking through not just the allocations and the specifics of those, but also the policy requirements that we're imposing on all of those sites, because there's potentially going to be requirements about levels of affordable housing, the standards to which the homes need to be built, space standards, accessibility standards and things. So all of that needs to go into the mix and be assessed. So we will need to get expert viability consultants in to help us. But I think the in-house resource will help us to hopefully reach a good position before we go through that process to minimise the work that's needed in assessing the plan as a whole before we submit it for examination.
Thank you. If I may go on to my second related question, because I think really understanding the viability of each individual site is going to be, hugely time-consuming, complicated. But my reading of this suggests, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the decision about what we're asking them to deliver from our policy point of view and our judgment of the viability of their site as a developer isn't going to be binding on them. And having experienced and seen viability assessments on developments myself, I know how good developers have been at getting out of delivering what they said they were going to do and what we said that they should do. And does this really help close that gap down? I suspect possibly not, but Ed, you can tell me what you think.
Well, first of all, I don't think it would be a case of doing detailed assessments for every single site. As I say, I think it would be the large-scale strategic sites on a sort of risk assessment basis. One of the things we need to do through this local plan is allocate more smaller sites to support small and medium-sized enterprises. So I wouldn't envisage just doing detailed viability assessments of a site that's perhaps only 5 dwellings. But certainly on the larger sites, like the examples given in the report, I think we need to do those more detailed assessments. I don't think it's foolproof by any means. It sets a benchmark and sort of a line in the sand, but things are potentially going to change post-adoption of any plan. You don't know what the economic circumstances might be moving forwards if an application comes in only a couple of years after the local plan. Build costs could change. As we've seen in the last year, 18 months, build costs have gone up massively. Employment costs are changing. All of those things could have an impact. And those are things that would have changed since the allocation and completely beyond anyone's control. So we would still have to have some regard to those sorts of issues and how they've impacted. So in answer to your question, no, it's far from foolproof, but it's better than it was, and it's probably as good as it can be, bearing in mind that things are always going to change over time. And we're going to have regard to that, because the only alternative would be, if a development has become unviable, is that it then doesn't happen. And I don't think really that's in anyone's interests, because we need to deliver the housing and the jobs to meet the needs of the community moving forwards. So we have to find a way to make these sites viable and deliver them.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other hands, Sarah?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Allen, followed by Councillor Miller.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The intensely complicated area that Ed's been explaining is actually even worse, because we do have a planning obligations SPD that was created in 2017, which lays out a number of issues, including the issue of overage. And that was put into the whole approach so that we could get around developers underestimating what their homes or their developments were going to do in terms of sale price in reality. I'm not sure whether that was ever tracked and what happened in reality. I'm not sure how good we have been in collecting the Section 106 and SIL and other funds. And I'm not sure what flexibility we have in terms of thresholds, because all too often developers want to push the point at which these monies are due way back into the stage of the development. And you add to all of that the need for an overall strategic structure plan, the Devon structure plan as was, which needs to be looked at by everybody concerned. And then even further, we didn't ever include health in the planning obligations contributions because that wasn't specified at the time. So really, I'm just very concerned that when the government has benchmarks, that's all well and good, but we need to be very, very careful that what is actually happening is going to create the right policies, but also that those policies will result in the right amounts of infrastructure and the right amounts of affordable housing. And all too often it becomes a big negotiation tussle. So my last point is, to what extent are our staff trained in negotiation tactics? Thank you very much, Chair.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. You did actually come to a question towards the end of your statement, and can you answer that last point, Ed, please, about to what extent are we skilled and our staff skilled and able to negotiate and drive a reasonable bargain with developers? Thank you.
Yes, certainly, Chair. Yeah, I mean, as part of staff's professional training is in terms of negotiation skills. I mean, in reality, a lot of it's about evidence. Fundamentally, it's not a negotiation in the sense of how you might go and buy a second-hand car or something, of just trying to drive the price down. It's very much based on evidence, and it's having the knowledge to understand what evidence you need, get that evidence from the developer, and then assess that to have an evidence-led approach to that negotiation. So yes, all all the senior officers who are negotiating on these large-scale developments where these viability issues arise have all had training and undertake regular, continuous professional development on their skills to ensure that they have the skills to do that work.
Chair, there was in fact more than one question there. Maybe you didn't quite pick it up, but my concern was, are the results actually coming in? Are we collecting the funds in a timely way? And are we tracking the overage?
Ed, can you enlighten us on that, please?
Yes, certainly. So certainly, I mean, in terms of the collecting funds, I think it's been widely reported through this committee that we did develop a bit of a backlog in terms of invoicing and collecting 106 monies. We haven't lost track of any, but we are working through that backlog, which was identified through the swap audit that was carried out earlier this year, and we've got extra resources in place. 2 additional members of staff are helping us to work through that, and we are catching ourselves up very quickly in terms of all of that. So yes, we are getting into a position where we're far more up to date in terms of collecting the funds and making sure we do that, and then obviously follow through with the spend of those monies in consultation with communities. In terms of tracking overage, I mean, we do get the information in, and we do have that assessed either in-house by our in-house resource, or we're sometimes using a resource at Plymouth City Council to help us with doing that. I think the information we have had on overage clauses has meant that I don't think we've actually received any additional money as a result of the overage clauses. The work has reinforced the assumptions that were made at the viability stage, but that in itself is a worthwhile exercise, I think, in ensuring that we haven't been duped. We have been given sound information, and that's turned out to be the correct position. So I think that's been a good approach to take, and one I would recommend that we continue with the new local plan. And obviously we'll need to update the 2017 SPD that Councillor Allen referred to when we do the new local plan to reflect the changes that are taking place through that plan, and incorporate health and other contributions that may be sought in future to ensure that that's an up-to-date and robust guidance document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ed. So can I summarise to say you're telling us that things are getting better?
Yes, very much so. We're very much getting back on top of things, and the XCOM system is working well.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Miller has his hand up, Chair, followed by Councillor Chapman.
Thank you. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I will declare an interest as Goodmore's Farm application. That one of the case studies is partly in my ward, although I will stress that I retain an open mind despite being lobbied on the issue. So should the application change, I'm not predetermined against the principle of development on that site. Right, so I just wanted to note and thank Ed for how he's explained how the government guidance has improved. But, as a scrutiny committee, I still think, and focusing on the Goodmore's Farm case study, I think we need to further explore the potential for local failings, because there's a significant amount of public anger which is displayed almost every week in the local newspaper. So I want to focus on infrastructure. That there was a consultation which Councillor Chapman spoke to me about, and which the community seemed to be aware about as well, which predated the school, the idea of the school going into the plan in terms of infrastructure. And the school was never the idea of the school was never communicated to the residents. So when Ed was talking about no surprises, unfortunately, the perception from the residents is that they feel, so many of them feel completely ignored, and that the consultation exercise wasn't effective. I would like to dig into more detail, if possible, potentially into a future meeting, into how that consultation worked and what happened between the stages of that consultation with the residents, public meeting, I believe it was in the form of, and what we ended up with when it was allocated. And as for Ed's comments on and I just wanted to mention, because I think it's an important thing to say, that our communities need housing, and any development is better than no development at all, was kind of the suggestion on that site or any other. I think it's really important to point out that what our communities need is affordable housing. That's what they need. And actually, if you're providing housing that's not affordable, and I'm not limiting that just to Goodmore's Farm, there are various schemes that have gone ahead where that hasn't happened. You're not providing really anything to local people because of the gulf, especially around our area, between wages and house prices. So actually what you end up with is a lot of houses, and Goodmore's Farm there's a concern about this with such low number of affordable houses. They're just going to be sort of eaten up by buy-to-let investors, and then you just end up with a larger private rented sector. So I just want to make that point, because I think it is too simplistic to say that development is more houses is necessarily good everywhere. This is the Goodmore's Farm examples case study it is a greenfield site as well. So I want to make that point, but also I just wanted to sort of suggest to the committee that we do get one more report on certainly on the Goodmore's Farm case study, but perhaps a few others in terms of this consultation process, because it is a serious concern within my ward, and I'm sure there are other examples as well. Thank you.
Do you wish to comment on that, Ed? I'm not quite sure at what state the Goodmore, the site under discussion is already passed through the planning stage. Is that now almost fait accompli, or is there more to go on that we can have an impact on in the future?
Well, Chair, the site has planning permission, both outline and reserve matters coming through. So there's not really an opportunity. And as I said at the outset, and my understanding is not the role of Scrutiny Committee to scrutinise particular planning decisions. What I would say in response to Councillor Miller's comments, and I'm not sure which consultation he's referring to, but the primary school was always a requirement of Strategy 22 of the adopted local plan. So I'm surprised if residents were not aware of the requirement for a school on the site. And obviously the local plan was subject to several stages of consultation prior to its adoption. So that should have been well known that the school was a requirement to be delivered on that site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Maddie, you next, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, Ed. Long time no see, no hear. Goodmore's Farm, obviously because I know more about it than the other site. 8 years ago, and there were 3 public meetings. The original plan was for 500 houses. Residents came up with 350, shop, clubhouse, playing field, and doctor's surgery. The school was not on Exmouth Town Council's local plan, because I was one of the councillors that worked on the local plan. I was also the councillor that took the local plan over to the Knoll to be sent to the inspector. I was told the day before by an East Devon councillor from Exmouth that the school had been put on to Exmouth local plan after it arrived at East Devon. So that is one of my bugbears, because town council were not consulted, it was not put on the plan. The inspector told me when I objected at the meeting when presenting the plan that was a fight for another day. Well, I've thought and I've talked on it about 3 times now, and it is just gone through. However, I think morally that was wrong.
Yes.
And I would hope.
Maddie, can I interrupt? The Goodmoors, as Ed has explained, that plan has already been passed and is under
I know. What I'm trying to say is, and I know a lot of government legislation has changed, but I think it's important for this council going forward with its new local plan that all the problems that have come up on different planning sites, be wherever they are in East Devon, that we need to look at them and say, well, how did this happen and why did it happen? Do you understand what I'm saying, Chair? County Council...
I do understand, Maddie, but as Ed has said...
Yeah, I know we can't change it. It's gone through.
Planning operates, the planning committee and planning legislation operates in a different, I don't want to say a different universe, in a different way. And I think the questions you're putting here are questions for strategic planning.
Well, I am asking Ed a question. County Council put forward for a school. They then said that they don't need the school. They have said this year they don't need a school for at least another 7 years, and maybe in the future one of the academies might need the site. So they have got the site. We have got less housing, but they have got the site for a school that they don't need, and they don't know when they need it in the future. So will the new government legislation be able to deal with this sort of problem? Now, I understand the developers put money towards the Dean and Way, and I'm hoping that the leader of the council will let EDDC put forward to the next levelling up fund the money from the developer to county for this. I also don't understand why we've got industrial units in a residential area instead of a business hub, when we've got Lympstone 1 and 2 and 3 coming on board. So if Ed could explain that to me, I'm obviously very ignorant. And Lympstone's green belt, now because the houses are next door to Brixington houses, does this mean that Lympstone's green belt no longer exists? Because I thought with a green belt round a property, or round a village, prohibited development. But if they're going right up to the edge, does that mean the green belt's gone? So I don't understand that either. So I would be grateful if Ed could help me out here. Thank you, Chair.
As I understand it, any development where green belts are affected would be something for the planning committee to consider when every councillor affected has an opportunity to make representations.
Well, has it changed under the new government guidelines?
That is the question, Ed. Has it changed?
No, that hasn't changed. I mean, through you, Chair, I mean, we're in danger of getting into detailed issues about planning decisions, but I mean, in terms of general principles, I think there's always this issue in terms of the infrastructure requirements when a development is proven to be unviable, about balancing priorities and decisions about what infrastructure is funded and what isn't. in this case, at the time of the application, the county council advised us that there was an acute shortage of primary school places in the town due to a large part of high birth rate in the area in recent years. So they were very keen to retain a site for a primary school, and planning committee agreed and prioritised that as part of their decision. I think it would have been very hard to do anything else, given the importance of providing education facilities to support new development. In terms of the industrial units or employment units, I don't think they're intended to be heavy industrial units. One of the aspirations of the local plan was to deliver employment alongside housing sites, to create mixed use areas, to reduce out commuting, and deliver homes and jobs alongside each other. So that's why that was a requirement of this site and why that's been done. In terms of the green wedge with Lympston, I don't believe the site intrudes into the green wedge, so that remains in place and provides that separation and stops Lympston and Exmouth coalescing. And obviously it's important that we retain that to prevent that from happening in future as well.
Thank you, Ed. I wish to bring this discussion on Goodmore's Farm to a close, but I see Val Ranger and then the leader of the council has their range. So can we have Val, please, the vice chairman of the committee? Thank you, Val.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. Is anything flagged up at the site allocation stage in the HELA process? In 10 Hill, for example, because I can think of numerous examples, where sites are built on the side of a hill and then the developer pulls out of it's either affordable housing or infrastructure. Secondly, when we're talking about the application stage, are we talking outline or reserved matters? Thirdly, what if a developer runs out of money? I can think of a site in Tipton. Do the conditions applied at the original right on?
Sorry, Val, you're breaking up, but thank you for three. We heard three very concise questions, which I think Ed will be able to answer.
One more.
No, you're breaking up, Val.
I'll put it in the chat.
Right, you are. I don't think the chat is something that we can record as part of the meeting because it's not in the public domain, is it? Ed, can you go and answer the three specific points that Val raised?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, as I heard them, I think the first question was about consideration that's given to the topography of a site at the HELA stage. I mean, the HELA is considering the achievability and deliverability of sites, so it has to give some consideration to those issues as to whether or not the site is developable. Obviously, if it's on a slope of 1 in 2 or something, then it's not going to be reasonably developable. But we won't have detailed viability assessments to understand the costs of the earthworks and engineering operations potentially to deliver a site on a slope. And I think that's part of the issue with the Goodmore's Farm site, is there wasn't that more detailed assessment to understand the cost implications of the topography of the site. So that is something we need to have more regard to in future. I think she then asked about the viability process at application stage, whether that's at outline or reserved matters. It would be primarily done at outline stage because you're dealing with the principles at that stage, but it could also come up at reserved matters stage in terms of detailed design features that could have an impact on viability. So it does have to relate back, so it can span both, but primarily at outline stage. I then wrote down a question about what if the developer went bust and couldn't complete the development. I mean, I don't see that's really a matter for the planning process because the planning permission runs with the land. So if the developer were to go bust, it's likely that the site would be sold and passed on to another developer who could then come forward and complete the scheme under the original planning permission, or potentially bring forward their own proposals, but that wouldn't really be for the planning process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Ed. And you'll remember there is a case in Budley Salterton near the hamlet of Knoll where a developer went bust and another developer took over and delivered the site. Thank you very much. Councillor Arnott, the leader of the council, you're next, Paul, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll be very brief. Just a question, but some information beforehand. So, Councillor Chapman asked about Dinan Way and the Levelling Up Fund. So, I'm happy to reassure her that I had a meeting with Simon Jupp MP last week and the leader of the County Council, and we discussed that at length. And Simon thinks he understands why it was knocked back initially, but the will is there to resubmit that, but to also do a little bit further work on the added elements on that. And I'm meeting Simon and Neil Parish again tomorrow with the CEO, and we'll talk more widely about the Levelling Up Fund in terms of round 2. We don't actually know what round 2 is yet. Government have yet to decide, but just for information, Chair, we would hope that the council would put forward both the Dinan Way one again in alliance with County, and we would be looking at something in the Axe Valley as well, relating to Axminster and Seaton. Seaton Seafront in particular. So that's the point of information. The question, Chair, which I won't pretend is my own, is Val's fourth question, which is literally this: to ask Ed, what about enforcement if a developer tries to wriggle out of its obligations under a planning application? Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you for that information, Paul, and thank you for transmitting Val's question. Ed, again, a direct question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, enforcement of a Section 106 agreement, because it's a legal obligation on the developer, is through the courts. We would have to prosecute them for breach of the agreement and seek restitution through the courts, which is a long and potentially expensive and convoluted process, but can be done if needs arise. We generally find that through force of persuasion, shall we say, that we get there in the end in terms of developers delivering what they're required to. But that in itself is sometimes a drawn out process of angry letters and persuasion, but it usually gets results in the end. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Sarah, can you see any other hands up?
Chair, Councillor Miller and Councillor Allen still have their hands up.
Have you got anything fresh to say, Paul? Or
yeah, mine is a genuine point of order, actually, and it's on a point of law. So Ed Freeman's advice was that we can't reassess planning applications through the Scrutiny Committee. I wrote to Anita Williams, our Deputy Monitoring Officer, on the 2nd of June, and I've not yet received a response, but there are exceptions to this rule not being able to be reassessed. If there is an allegation that the function that the authority is responsible for has not been discharged, and there is a suggestion that the consultation element has not been discharged, or that it is failing in a systemic basis, and there is a suggestion that there are other such applications, because there's a case study of at least 2. Therefore, I also attended a recent LGA scrutiny training session in which I actually raised this specific case study of something we were considering, and my advice from the professional trainers was that this item was perfectly legitimate to be carried forward, to be investigated further. We are not challenging this planning application. We are trying to learn lessons from elements of the of how it ended up becoming an application and the consultation process, so we can learn lessons for our future local plan. I just feel really concerned that I feel the advice contradicts what I've read in law and also advice I've had through the Local Government Association. So I just wanted to be firm on that, because I don't want us to throw this item in the dustbin. I think there are more questions, and I think that the issue of the public meetings is one, and Councillor Chapman raised them, they're legitimate, they're before my time. I would like a report to come back on the public meetings that happened on not just this application, but other applications, and any minutes, any notes that were made from that period. I think it's really important that this scrutiny is about learning lessons. This is not about reassessing individual planning. Nobody's made that suggestion. So I wanted to raise that, and I'd like to propose that we bring this item back with another report looking into the public meetings, which I hope Councillor Chapman will second, as I feel she is open-minded on the application on the case. I think she's annoyed about the process that has been followed, which I think is totally legitimate. Thank you.
Chair, could I just respond to say perhaps this is something that the monitoring officer, Henry Gordon-Lennox, has commented previously at the scoping stage on the suggestion that it was possible to look at the individual matter, and also on the issue of consultation, because the consultation process is something that's been dealt with previously. Can I suggest that we ask Henry Gordon-Lennox to give comment on what he thinks is appropriate before Scrutiny make any decision to bring anything back? Thank you, Chair.
Anita, you preempted me. I was going to ask
Sorry, Chair.
if a member wants this done, that actually put in a much more detailed form for the scrutiny to see what exactly does need to be scrutinised. I notice there's been a lot of concern about why did we allocate land for a school when it's quite clear from what Ed said that the county council in the early stage says there is need for a school. So there's often a lot of misinformation and confusion on planning matters, quite understandably so, when they are so emotional, and so I totally agree with you on that, Anita. So perhaps we can ask Henry Gordon-Lennox to advise us further on the appropriateness or otherwise of us continuing with this matter. Thank you.
Can that be a formal recommendation then, Chair? So it's in the minutes, and the monitoring officer comes to the next meeting and answers questions on that specific matter. Is that okay?
Well, the committee can certainly put a recommendation that can be voted on. I would rather see we've made a specific sort of complaints that perhaps Ed and the monitoring officer between them can put in a short report stating exactly what the consultation was, where it took place. And the difficulty is when you have public meetings in public forums, there are not always minutes, but I think it's something that we'll seek Henry's advice on before we take it forward. Thank you. Sorry, you did make a recommendation. Is there a seconder for it?
Yes, Chair, I'll second it.
Can I just check the wording for the recommendation, which is that, yep, I think is we ask Henry Gordon-Lennox to advise further on the, I'm just scribbling, the appropriateness or on the ability, that's probably better, the ability of the Scrutiny Committee to further consider, sorry, scribbling, further consider Goodmore's, I'm looking at Councillor Miller, Goodmore's Farm as a specific case, yeah, Goodmore's, and the consultation process that surrounded it, something like that. Yeah. Okay.
I think the main comment seems to be on the lack of consultation, a lack and fullness of consultation, and that might be a lesson we can learn going forward.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, Chair.
Thank you.
Except to say that advice comes at the next meeting, because I'm concerned I don't want this to drift any further. I'd like to get this item concluded in learning lessons, but I think it needs to be at the next meeting if possible. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to tie the monitoring officer down, because at the moment we're all aware, getting ready for the budget and things, there are very great pressures on his time, but I'm certain Henry will do all he can to get it to us in that as timely a fashion as possible. So you've heard, members have heard the the recommendation and the seconding. Can we please have a show of hands in the usual manner? Yellow, is it ticks or hands?
Green ticks for
green
yes,
ticks
red crosses for no.
Red crosses, thank you.
Yellow hands or whatever colour they might be for abstentions.
Thank you, and the vote is underway. And Chair, we have 11 green ticks, 1 hand up for abstention and no red crosses.
Thank you, that recommendation is carried. So that brings that item to a close. We now are moving on.
Chair, I did have my hand up, and I had a specific new element to bring to the committee, if you indulge me.
Well, I think we've made the recommendation and we've moved on now, Mike. Thank
you
very much.
That recommendation, but my comment is about a structural one and what lessons we can learn from that. So it's a completely different issue.
Can you speak as brief as you can be then, Mike? Please, we've gone on enough on this project. Thank you.
Yeah. Firstly, I think scrutiny is about learning lessons and being a critical friend. And in that element, if we look at the Ottery Moor Lane development, it wiped out about half the industrial space in Honiton when it was handed over to housing. Now, I'm not going to go over the absolute issue there, but my concern is that when a whole town loses half its industrial space, that seems to be a very critical planning matter. And what I want to know is how we can improve our consideration of that wider situation so that planning committee can make a decision for the area and not just for the issue of that site.
That's a fair point, Mike, but again, I think it is something for strategic planning. All these issues you refer to now went through the planning committee, where people had an opportunity to make representations, where questions could be asked and a decision was made. Just because we don't like the decision does not mean we necessarily have to review every decision. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chair, but you're missing the point. The point here is that planning decisions are made on the basis of a site. And here I'm talking about a wider issue, and it was for the economic health of the town. And I'm asking how it might be possible to learn lessons and improve our processes to make sure that we actually have that taken into account, rather than the narrow view, which is that we can only consider the site.
I'd like to second that if that's a recommendation.
I'd like to come back on Ed on this. Surely that is part of, that should be written as part of the structure of the local plan. That's the whole point of the local plan. Well, perhaps it should be.
We're getting to that point, Chairman. It wasn't, and that allowed it to go through. And I'm asking how it could be improved.
By improving the making of the local plan, to make the local plan a bit tighter and clear, more clearly understood, with set policies on the things you're trying to deal with.
And that's the recommendation which has been seconded by Councillor Miller.
What was your recommendation again? Please read it in a...
The difficulty of making a resolution in a planning decision on a particular site that has implications for the wider health of the economic area of the town or village. How can we improve that particular issue to make sure that...
So what, you started off by saying the difficulty in what you're trying to get a recommendation to inquire how we can ensure that are taken into account, the things you want to raise are taken into account in planning. Is that it? In planning decisions?
It's a procedure.
Recommendations need to be fairly concise and to the point. So can you please recommendation concise and to the point, please?
I'm trying, Chairman, but you keep interrupting me, so I'm having trouble.
Chair, could I perhaps suggest that Ed comments on the point that's been made, because it sounds a little bit to me as if it's a strategic planning issue, and perhaps in the meantime that would give Councillor Allen. Sorry, Councillor, that would give Councillor Allen a few minutes perhaps to formulate the wording. We do need some wording for the recommendation, but perhaps Ed could comment in the meantime, Chair.
Yes, over to you, Ed, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would agree with Anita. It is very much a strategic planning issue when considering potential sites to allocate, such as in Honiton. With the last local plan, members would have been presented with a series of sites that have been put forward for consideration and assessment by officers of those sites and their relative merits. And clearly one of the things that would have gone against the Ottery Moor Lane site is the loss of employment land on that site. And that would have been assessed by officers and a recommendation made as to its relative merits with other sites that were also coming forward in the town and being considered by, what would have been, I think, Development Management Committee, and then on to Cabinet and ultimately full council in terms of adoption of the plan, would have considered those issues, as did the inspector who then examined the plan. So all of those issues in terms of the impact of allocating that site and the loss of employment land was fully considered throughout the whole process. The fact is that the resolution was made that was the best option of what, if I recall, was a fairly poor set of options in terms of allocations for housing in Honiton because of the constraints of the town. And it was considered that accommodating housing on that site was the best way of delivering the needs of the town. I don't think, well, it's possibly not for me to judge, but I don't think that it was an issue with the process that was followed, because it's all of the material considerations were put before members, and that was the judgment that was made. So I don't know how things would have been different, but up to members if they want to review that decision.
Yes, again, it's slightly missing the point. When allocations are made specifically for altering the balance of the economic situation of a town or village, we should look very carefully at getting economic advice clearly put to the relevant committee. That's the recommendation.
Ed, would economic advice have been given before that decision was taken with regard to this site?
Not on the economic balance for the town, no.
Well, through you, Chair, I don't know without checking what role economic development had in terms of advising on that particular allocation and the impact on the town as a whole. But certainly a part of the consideration of sites being put forward for allocations for any local plan would be the impact on the town as a whole. It wouldn't just be looking at that individual site, the implications of it, the loss of the existing uses and the impact on the economy and position in terms of housing provision in the town should have been looked at holistically, and I'm sure it was.
Thank you.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't, and that's why I'm putting the recommendation forward. In future, we need a proper economic balance recommendation alongside similar proposals. I mean, I can't be any clearer, Chair. Because Ed says it was done, I was on the committee, I was on the local planning, strategic planning, and it was not put forward. And I'm simply trying to get a proper balance into such considerations for the future.
So, Anita, would a suitable wording be that this committee recommends that a more precise and full economic evaluation is provided for such applications going forward?
You can make that, Chair. Who do you want to make that
Well,
recommendation?
I'm just trying to paraphrase Mike's recommendation.
Thank you, and I'm grateful because I was struggling for the wording. Who would you want to make that recommendation to? Recommendations and scrutiny would usually go to Cabinet or to Council, neither of whom seem particularly well placed to resolve this issue.
Can we make that to Strategic Planning Committee?
I think you probably can. I probably need to check, but I think you can, and I suspect the chair of strategic planning would accept the recommendation, and they can consider that scrutiny recommends to Strategic Planning Committee that, and then your wording is considered. It's not really an issue, a matter for scrutiny to recommend at this point, but you could certainly, I would suggest you recommend it to strategic planning, and you allow strategic planning to consider it in the round with the rest of the work that they're doing next week, Ed? Next week. Well, next week they will be considering the
week
draft,
after next.
week after, sorry, the draft local plan, I think we're calling it, or whatever we're calling it, the early version of the local plan. So obviously working draft. That this would be the time perhaps for Councillor Allen to go and have that input. Might be a more you can certainly make a recommendation, but given the imminent nature of strategic planning, it may be better to make that suggestion to strategic planning or to the chair separately.
I think we make that recommendation if the committee approves, and then if Mike's able to go make the case, if he can then go and make the case with the support of this committee, that will strengthen his arm. Are you happy with that, Mike?
I'm very happy with the wording and with your support. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've had that was Mike's proposal, seconded
by Councillor Miller.
Yeah. That's fine. Then you've heard the proposition and it's been seconded. Can I have a show of hands, please, in the usual way?
Sorry, Chair, before I vote, we have a restatement of what the proposal actually is? Because I've kind of lost the thread here. Could somebody read out the actual wording, please?
I think, did you get my wording down, Anita?
I didn't get all of it, Chair. It would start that the committee recommends to Strategic Planning Committee that a more precise, and I missed it from there, more precise holistic economic evaluation is carried out in relation to proposed sites.
Yes. Yeah.
Major sites.
The content that.
Did you say major sites? I think.
Major sites. Yeah, they're happy with that.
Right. Does everybody clearly understand what the recommendation is? Can we have a show of hands then, please?
Thank you. For those watching at home online, the vote is underway, and Chair, there are 8 green ticks in support, 1 red cross against, and 2 hands for abstention.
Thank you. That recommendation is carried. Thank you very much for that, Ed. We now move on again, and it's down to you again with regard to verbal report on the Strategic Planning Committee regarding the potential policy approaches for sport and recreation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this relates to a discussion at Strategic Planning Committee on the 5th of October of this year, where concerns were raised by some members on the committee about privately owned sports pitches being used for temporary events such as concerts and other events under permitted development rights. So some members may be aware that open land can be used usually for up to 28 days in a calendar year for temporary events. So that can involve car boot sales, concerts, open air concerts, and those sorts of events. And as part of the recovery from the pandemic, the government introduced extending those rights so that such land could be used for up to 56 days as temporary use in a calendar year. to try and encourage more of those events and the economic benefits that come from them. And I think the members were raising concerns that because this related to sports pitches, it meant that for up to 56 days in a calendar year, a sports pitch could be out of use for sports pitch purposes, sometimes at the height of a sports season, which could have major knock-on impacts for the clubs using those facilities and preventing them from hosting matches that they're required to in a league format, or perhaps problems having training events and things like that. So it was referred that the recommendation from Strategic Planning Committee was a request at Scrutiny Committee to look at the effect of the extended 56-day temporary use under permitted development rights, with a possible report to the Secretary of State on its impact. So members may want to consider that recommendation in that context. The only thing I would add to that is, since that consideration by Strategic Planning Committee, the government have announced that what was a temporary measure to extend from 28 days to 56 days, which originally runs to the end of this year, is not to be extended. So it will revert from the 1st of January next year back to 28 days in a calendar year. And I'm not aware of this issue arising when it was only 28 days, because obviously that's quite limiting, or certainly much more limiting than twice that at 56 days. The other point I would make is that the issue has been raised specifically about privately owned sports pitches, and obviously the majority of sports pitches in the district are publicly owned, and so those issues haven't arisen. It's only been on those privately owned. So just hopefully some useful context for members' consideration of that issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ed. So I don't know if the heat is off because it's not being extended this coming year. There are lots of examples of private sports fields. I used to play golf at Ascot Golf Club, which goes around the middle of the racecourse. So there's certainly more than 56 days a year there where we couldn't play golf. So these things do happen. And of course, the owner of a bit of property does to some extent have rights over it. And if he rents that property to things like sports clubs for their use, he must come to some arrangement with the sports clubs for him to be able to do so. But I note what Ed has said, and my feeling is that because the 56 days is not being extended next year or in the future, I think it's something we can note and don't need any further action on it. Does the committee share my view on that path? Am I getting nods?
Chair, Councillor Miller has his hand up.
Right, you are, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was good to hear about your former golfing experience at Ascot. I think it would be nice for the committee to have a written report on this, and that was what I was expecting. But though I understand the pressure on officers' time, then it might be the case that we want to lobby the Secretary of State or consider our own policies as a result. But I think it'd be nice to have a short written report at a future meeting. Thank you.
I'm anxious not to put other work on our officers. I think Ed explained the situation very clearly, and I think a report setting out that will be about a quarter of a page of A4. Now, do we want a report of that nature, or are we happy as a committee to let things lie? Have we got a seconder for Paul's recommendation?
Yes, I'll second.
Right, it's been proposed in a second. And can we have a show of hands if we want a written report to set out what Ed has just very clearly explained to us? Thank you.
The vote is underway. Chair, there are 5 red crosses for no, 5 green ticks for yes, and 1 abstention.
Oh, the power has gone to my. I have the casting vote, and I was clear in my explanation, so I will cast my casting vote as I cast my original vote for no. Thank you, Sarah. Now, where are we now? Let me have a look at this. Some of you will be aghast to see I'm actually using paper. The next item, I think, was the expenditure on consultation and agency staff. Is there an officer to speak on this?
There is, Chair. John Symes is in the meeting.
Thank you. Go ahead, John. Thank you very much.
John, we can't hear, unless it's just me. I can't hear John, but you're not muted. Could anybody else hear
him either? No, can't hear him.
Ah, now you're muted. I wonder if you're not connected properly. Try again. No. John, are you using, just nod, are you using Global Desktop? Might be worth disconnecting and reconnecting. I think he has.
Any better?
Ah, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, got you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's hopefully the hope the camera is turning off has helped us as one chair. So thank you. Yes, the report is an annual bringing expenditure on the expected consultant agency in Asia. It covers expenditure year financial 2021. Indeed, looking from the Towers Table Ledger financial at which the point the finance service in this out is some more to get from them detail. So within the that is within the reason.
Sorry, I can't hear.
In there.
Now your signal's breaking up greatly, John, and I think looking at the detail in the report and even the bits that I can just about read, I'm certain there are going to be questions, and if we can't hear your answers, there's little point in asking questions. So I don't know whether we can.
Could I suggest a short break, perhaps, for a moment, and then John can disconnect and reconnect, which often helps with our system, and see if it can work in a moment.
We'll try that, and I can go finish my glass. Thank you. Water.
5 minutes, everybody. Is that sufficient? Nods. Yeah. John, go out and go back in and see if it works.
Might be worth him going outside a Global Desktop if he's in it.
It's always worth a try. Let's see what happens.
Hello, Sarah. You there?
Was that you, John?
I could hear you, John.
Ah, brilliant. Hopefully that's fixed that issue. Thank you.
You sound a lot clearer now. It was sort of burbly. It was like everything you were saying was coming twice, but at a slightly offset. It was really weird. But now you sound fine.
Typical. Thank you.
Did I hear you back with us, John? Is it working?
Yes, I think it's now working. Thank you.
Perfect. The magic of The magic of Control-Alt-Delete.
Yeah, you obviously work in IT.
Yeah, I've got a T-shirt and everything.
If everybody's still in the meeting, Chair, if you're ready to restart.
I am, thank you. I've just got to plug my iPad into charging. I didn't realise quite how much juice Zoom meetings absorb. There we are.
My iPad cannot take enough power on board to cope with a Zoom meeting. So if it goes on for too long, I eventually run out of power and I can't charge up fast enough.
No.
Very, very greedy with Zoom.
Chair, if you're ready to start, we are still live on YouTube.
I am ready to start, and thank you for that warning. Right, are we all back in?
Are we Cora? Could we just perhaps have a cameras on or a thumbs up from the committee just to check that I can see some people. 1, 2, 3, 4. I can see 5, Sarah. You happy with that?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Chair, you're Cora if you're ready to go.
Thank you, John. Because of the communications, can you, I'm afraid, start from the beginning again so we can be sure we all hear you? Thank you.
Of course, Chair. Thank you. Apologies, everybody. Yeah, so this is the annual report reporting to you the spend on consulting agency expenditure in 2020-21. The process we follow is we just take the financial information from the ledger, we send this out to the service areas, and they provide us with the a bit more detail behind that spend, and that's what's in the appendices to the report. Apologies that the appendices have come through quite small, and they are quite hard to read. So we will be looking at presenting those in a better format in future. We're also currently looking at how we're recording this expenditure on the ledger. So again, hopefully we'll be able to report more detail in future. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm also happy to take away any suggestions of further information or presentation that members would like to see in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, John. I've just got one question. You know, this year is better than last year for the same period. Do I take that as, yeah, it is for the same period. Was there a desire to spend more on consultants, but we couldn't because of COVID and we weren't able to employ them, or did we actually employ all the services we thought we needed? So this reflects a proper comparison with the previous year. That's my only point on it. Or do you or do you just get the invoices and you don't necessarily know what else is required?
From my understanding, in terms of the services, they have had, they've got all the spend that they needed. In terms of capital, obviously things did slow down in that area, so it's possibly slightly slower in that area. So yes.
I find it difficult to ask any specific question because, as you pointed out, even with a magnifying glass, it's difficult to read. Any questions from any other members?
Chair, just to confirm that there has been an email. Sarah sent an email yesterday morning with the PDFs, the full PDFs of the documents. 10:01 yesterday, if anybody's struggling for the detail.
Some milk. Oh, we've been out. We've been out, haven't we? Yeah. We've been out.
Chair, if you're ready to take questions, Councillor Hawkins has his hand up, followed by Councillor Rylance.
Yeah, I was looking for your email, which I hadn't seen. So can you just call the questioners in the order they indicated, please, Sarah? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins, then.
Thank you, Sarah. This is a matter that originally came to the Ordnance and Governance Committee, and I'm reminded last year, looking at the agency staff expenditure, it was requested that there was some comparatives put on there in order to be able to actually scrutinise this report. If we look, for example, at one of the lines is £108,000 on seasonal staff, but there's no way of knowing be able to tell how reasonable that is. If that's one person for half a year, that's very expensive. If that's 300 people for a short period of time, then that helps put a lot of context here. So without that kind of information of FTEs, how long of a period these amounts cover, it's impossible to scrutinise this report and work out if we're comparing apples and pears or any other variant. And I know the committee's been asked to note this, but it's even as far as that, it's difficult to be able to do anything with this report, unfortunately. John, is it possible that we could get this report to come back with some added detail that would help us make sense of what these figures actually mean in the context of what's been utilised around the organisation? Because obviously it's depending on what these figures are, could mean there is areas of concern or not, depending. Thank you.
If I can, Chair. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we can go away and start collating that information. Yes, we can certainly bring that back.
Thank you for that, John. Any other questions?
Councillor Rylance has her hand up, Chair.
Right, all right. Eleanor?
Thank you, Chair. So my question, I don't know whether you're going to be able to answer it, in fact, John, is what do we have any idea what proportion of the agency the agency engagements and also the need for consultancy has come from a lack of what might be considered capacity, what should be normal capacity of our council, as in what proportion of this was there to cover staff shortages, essentially. And I know that some of it is actually linked to COVID and is covered by government funds. So presumably that the actual figure comparing like for like to previous years, it would actually be lower than what we're being shown, I guess, because most normal years haven't had COVID or got an import of government funds to cover a pandemic. So I think it would be good probably to tidy these up a little bit if there's not too much officer time involved. But I really would like to know what proportion of this spend was to cover things that we legitimately probably ought to be done by people in-house. We would expect them to be done by people in-house. A lot of it's consultancy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Getting consultants, they're specialists. We may not have those skills in-house anyway. Thank you.
Can you come back on that, John, please?
Yes. Yeah, so in terms of how we're recording this in the ledger, that is one of the aspects that we're sort of trying to capture in the system itself. But yeah, we can go away, we can analyze this further and break that down into types, which one of them would be if it's, which would then give us a percentage of whether it's staff coverage. So yes, we can do that.
Does that answer you, Eleanor? So what we're saying, we acknowledge the report, but we are saying, but in future we'd like more information. Yes, Mike?
Yeah, I did have my hand up, Chair. While we're talking about different formats, it's possible that using the cost centre codes, it would be possible to present the information as a service group analysis as well as the way it's presented in terms of supplier. And it would be very helpful to know by service group where the major consultancy spends are, to take Councillor Rylance's viewpoint we need to know whether this is internal capacity being supplemented, whether it's external expertise or what. So it would be very helpful to know by service group what is in fact the issue. And so if it could be analysed by service group, my guess is it's all on spreadsheet and it should be fairly easy to pick that information out. Thank you, Chair.
A very fair point, Mike. We do, of course, as a matter of routine, get the heads of service before scrutiny to speak on their performance, and that is another avenue through which we can ask those very pertinent questions. But I think we could have a bit more information along the lines that committee members have asked for. And can you take that back and address that, John, please?
Yes, Chair, absolutely. Thank you.
Do we need a formal recommendation for that, or will we leave it so we get the next report of this nature? And if the information isn't there, ask for it to be provided before the relevant meeting. Would that satisfy people?
I can give you some words, Chair, if you like. I captured most of what was asked.
Well, I think the committee welcomes the report, is pleased to see there is a significant decrease in this type of spend, but would like to see more information as to the reason for the spend and under what specific areas of operation it occurs. Is that
service group, Chair, is easier to...
Service group, yeah.
So, Chair, what I captured was the welcomes report. Committee would like more detail regarding the spend, the types of spend, and what proportion of the spend is backfilling what should have been permanent staff, which is Councillor Ryland's point, and that it can be grouped by service group.
That's exactly right, yeah. Is everybody happy with that?
So are you proposing that from the Chair?
I'll propose that from the Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
I better vote yes, then, haven't I? Here.
Okay, members, if you'd like to vote now, Sarah can do the tallying.
Thank you. The vote's underway. Chair, and that's 10 green ticks, no red crosses and no hands in abstention.
Thank you very much. And thank you, John. I hope you enjoyed being present with us for the previous part of the meeting. Thank you very much. We now move on to the matters that have been put up for proposal. And I was going to ask for a change in order, but that relied on Jess Bailey being here. Is she here, Sarah?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Bailey is here.
Sorry, I'm under Strata iPad.
Right, with apologies to Paul, I very much welcome Jess's proposal because I've had an interest in sewage and water as I often swim off the beach at Budley. And there are certain aspects of it that Ed Freeman might be able to comment on with regard to sewage connections and if our planning policies, our allowances are actually in some measure overloading the system and making the circumstances work. So what I would like to do is invite Jess to come before Paul to give us her issue so we don't keep it any longer than is absolutely necessary. Is the rest of the committee happy with that? Yeah, that's fine then. Off you go then, Jess.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the Scrutiny Committee for putting this form on your agenda. I think we probably all agree that sewage discharges are a matter of massive public concern and to all of us as councillors. And I think that it would be really helpful to get South West Water to invite them to come to talk to our Scrutiny Committee about the sewage discharges that are happening on our coast and in our rivers. There are 5 rivers, I believe, in East Devon. And I think it would be really helpful to hear from them firsthand to talk about sewage discharges, to talk about what they're doing to improve the situation, and to talk about how how members of the public and councillors can access real-time data about what's happening in our rivers and our coast. It's absolutely fundamental to East Devon that having clean water in our rivers and our coast for wildlife and as a coastal for tourism, so that's the word. So I very much hope that the Scrutiny Committee will agree to this and that we'll invite them as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I, Jess, can I just come in here? Because I think actually we could widen the invitation. Although the water companies might be, if you like, the villains, the Environment Agency are, to use the same sort of metaphor, the police. And I think it would also be helpful to get South West Water and the Environment Agency before us to see what one is doing, and what the other is doing to try and control it. And another issue which certainly affects those of us who have coastal wards is that as regard water purity and contamination of water is concerned, the only measurements and the only information that is available with regarding the expected state of the water runs from May till October. Now, with the current fashion, and they were swimming off Budley Beach this morning in wild swimming, I'm wondering if during that, as we are very much a coastal council, we should investigate the possibility and the desirability of having that sort of information the year round, because that affects not just swimmers, it affects the quality of our fish that is caught off our beaches and our shellfish. So I welcome what you say, Jess. I must admit to having had a long time interest in this. In fact, soon after I became a district councillor, I enforced myself onto the South West Peninsula Water Quality Committee, and I was surprised to find I was the only elected member who sat on that body. So if you don't mind me trying to expand and stretch, expand what you want to do, and I put sort of that wider suggestion to the committee for their comments, questions, and eventually a vote. So I totally support Jess's proposal, but I think it could be because of my knowledge of this particular problem, it could be enlarged to give us a much better handle on the problem. Are you happy with that, Jess?
Yes, I think so. I think we might have, or I might have quite a lot of questions for South West Water, but I agree that it would also be useful to hear from the Environment Agency to see what they're doing, to see whether we have them both at the same time. I'm not sure, or consecutively, but yes, I think I definitely want to hear from the Environment Agency too. Thank you.
Well, it's the Environment Agency that actually measure what's going on as a result of what South West Water do. That's why I thought that both could be here together, because we can't have one blaming the other then. Anyway, I'll now throw it open to the rest. And I'm in your hands on this, Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Miller has his hand up, followed by Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to applaud and completely agree with this proposal that's been brought forward, and thank Councillor Bailey, Jess, for doing so. I'd like to propose acceptance of this coming forward, and I'd also like to suggest, because there will be a lot of questions in this meeting, that this be an extraordinary meeting of the Scrutiny Committee, so we have time to ask the relevant questions. This is such a key local issue, and I just really want to thank Councillor Bailey for putting it before us this evening, because it gives us a really good early opportunity for South West Water to come before us, for us to ask some constructive, hopefully constructive, difficult, I'm sure, but constructive questions. I agree with the Environment Agency being involved, but my own view is that South West Water will be the main subject and witness of such a meeting. So yeah, I'd just like to propose acceptance of this form, and hope that in a not too long distant future, we will be able to have an extraordinary meeting for this very important issue to be raised. And I think this is the most appropriate committee as well for doing so. So I thank Councillor Bailey for a form which I think is a really good form and covers a lot of issues that we'll be raising, I think. Thank you.
I hadn't thought of an extraordinary meeting. I'll have to ask if that's possible. That has a number of advantages. A, this could be a very long meeting on its own. And B, if we have an extraordinary meeting, we can probably give the South West Water more dates when they can appear, so they can't sort of plead all the dates we offer are inconvenient. So I think that is a useful addition. And it was Eleanor next, wasn't it, Sarah?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Rylands.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sarah. So when I first read your proposal, sorry, but through you, Chair, when I first read your proposal, Councillor Bailey, I thought, oh my goodness, I would so love to be able to do this meeting, but how on earth can we make it fit with our activities? Because, you know, South West Water are their own company. But then when you, Chair, just mentioned beach quality, of course, that's the obvious solution. You know, we're in charge of beach quality. We have to be able to ensure that we can offer an adequate and clean water for people to swim in, including our many, many visitors. So that is actually really coherent. So that is actually a district function over which we have control. But also, can we involve environmental health in some way? Because some of the things that are happening as a result of the activities or otherwise of South West Water are actually impacting on people's health in very real ways. And I'm just wondering whether I very much welcome the idea of having a standalone meeting to talk about this, because I personally will probably be able to take up about 3 hours worth of questions, just me, and I suspect everybody else will as well. But so many questions. I know. I'm sorry. I'm not on
I'll take your
clearly.
I had, if I can interrupt, I had written a note down here that we should include our environmental health because they are the agency who deal with the warning signs with regard to bathing water quality. So the three.
I mean, but also because we actually have turds in the street when it rains in some places, and that is really not on. We really can't. You know, this is 2021. We cannot be running a local area that has this sort of thing happening. You know, we can't have poo in the streets, and we can't have poo in the rivers, and we can't have poo in the sea. It shouldn't happen. So we need to find out why it's happening and try and work out how we can get it sorted out. And now that I've realised we actually do have a handle over it through these various things that we do that I keep forgetting about. I don't know why I keep forgetting about beach quality, because it's actually really important. Then I'm totally 100% in favour of it. So I read your proposal, Jess, and I thought, oh goodness, I would love to do this, but I don't see how we can. But actually we can do it, can't we? And we should. Thank you.
I do. I'm looking at lots of nodding heads. And if we are all in agreement, we all need information. So if we're not disagreeing that we should be investigating this, I would like to put a proposal that we, in an effort to fully understand the impact and causes of sewage pollution in all our watercourses, and to understand the effects of that, we invite South West Water, the Environment Agency, and our environmental health officers to attend was it a special meeting, whatever the wording is?
Extraordinary.
Extraordinary. With you, Paul, it's always extraordinary. An extraordinary meeting to answer our questions. And I'm now running out of words. It's catching. So we basically
to attend that meeting.
Yeah,
to attend that meeting. Chair, would members have any view on how bad that would be if it was a daytime meeting? I'm just thinking about the length of the meeting and perhaps getting those officers, the external bodies to attend.
A few years ago, when I was the deputy and portfolio holder, we did have such a meeting, and we also had somebody to talk to us on catchment sensitive farming, because one of the investigations of the water off Budley Beach was that the pollution was more down to bovine than human activity. So it is a very complicated issue, and I think we should be looking at all aspects of it as much as we can. But I don't want to dilute Jess's main concern, which is a concern of all of us, is the pressure and, if you like, the inadequacy of our sewage. And I asked Ed to stay because our planning decisions will have an impact on how much sewage is going down our pipes. And I'm just wondering if Ed can tell us how we can be assured that that we don't allow developments that overload the sewage system.
Chair, on a point of order, I'm afraid my computer is just running out of juice and I can't plug it in. So I'm totally in favour of what you suggested, but I'm going to have to dip out now. Do apologise.
Thank you, Mike. So the first thing is,
with respect, Chair, I think Anita was asking. Sorry.
Yeah.
Anita was asking if we could do a daytime meeting so that we can gather everybody together. That was her question.
After I said there is a precedent for one, which was attended by those agencies back. It's probably 8-9 years ago now.
Just sometimes a little easier to get those external bodies to attend if members are happy that would be something that we could look at. I'm seeing nods. Okay.
And it would have to, I think, for it to have any real effect, we need is, if we are at all able, for it to be a face-to-face meeting to put these people under pressure. Thank you. I see Maddie's got a hand up. Sarah, is there anyone else?
Yes, Councillor Davey, Councillor Chapman, and then Councillor Bailey and Councillor Parr.
So, did you say Ollie first?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Sarah, too, for spotting I was next. You've touched on this, Chair, when you mentioned planning, because I think it's also, that is a function, very much a function of East Devon District Council and something we do have control over, but that control to some extent is limited by the sewage provision made by South West Water, or the lack of it, and I think that was shown very clearly by Councillor Howe's intervention at strategic planning recently. So I think I would quite like to add to the resolution the implication of past planning decisions and the implications for future planning, because of our past planning decisions have already overloaded the ability of South West Water to cope with the sewage of developments, then that has implications for our planning going forward if they can't cope with the sewage we're producing already.
Thank you for that. Well, Ed, can you just comment on that? Then I think I can release you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it certainly does have implications for planning, and I know the issue was raised at Strategic Planning Committee in terms of some specific issues in the specific part of the district, which I know South West Water are investigating. And we did commit as officers to involve South West Water and have conversations with them about future growth aspirations and how that impacts through the planning process. So it may be that members consider that's more of an issue for strategic planning than a scrutiny function, which, as I understand it, is about more looking back over past decisions and processes rather than looking forward to future implications of growth, which I think can be taken forward through the strategic planning process, but it may have implications for past planning decisions. I would say that we do consult South West Water on both applications and allocations in terms of the local plan, and I understand that there were quite a lot of discussions with them in terms of the growth aspirations in the now adopted local plan, but they did not object to the plan and felt that they could accommodate the flows. There seems to be some question as to whether or not that's ringing true now, which I think is the point that's being raised, and perhaps something to raise with them if you have that meeting in terms of looking backwards. But I would recommend that in terms of future growth, that's taken forward through officer discussions with South West Water via Strategic Planning Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Ed. That's very useful. What I am frightened of is Jess's very sound and very timely proposal gets diluted and depleted by us going over and moaning about past planning decisions, because this evening we're all too well aware of what that happens. So I would it's something we can bear in mind, but I'm glad of Ed's input there that that is something that this committee can raise as a result of that meeting with our strategic planning and our planning committee. Thank you, Ed. You are very welcome to stay if you wish to, or Arsenal are on at the moment on BT Sports 2, I think. All right. That's just keeping me. Anyway, thank you very much. So anybody else? Maddie, sorry, Sarah, you had the order. I didn't.
Yes, it's Councillor Chapman, then Councillor Parr, followed by Councillor Bailey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Just Bailey. Yes, totally agree with what she's doing. I would like to ask, however, if we could also invite Clinton Devon, because they run most of the land up on the common. And we all know that underground springs are up there. And I know Budley has a couple of springs that come down into Budley. And we have a lot that come down into Exmouth. And Ed was saying about previous developments, the springs, the developers have put the water into the main drains, which doesn't help. We've had this with the Environment Agency before. So it would be helpful to have Clinton Devon there to let us know how the ponds and everything are doing up on the common, and how the springs are, because, you know, I hate to say it, Chairman, but when Goodmore's Farm comes up, you're going to get a lot more water from the springs under the Goodmore's Farm going into the main drains. So Jess might like to look at that. But I would like Clinton Devon be there to tell us what's happening up on the common. Thank you, Chair.
I don't want to enlarge it and get off the point, because if Clinton Devon, if water as a result of development is going into the drains, it's South West Water who control the drains. So, and if the springs are just going into the land surface drain as opposed to the sewage drain, that is not an issue that affects the sewage and the contamination of the things in the sewage that we don't want to find in our beaches, because houses now, I think I'm right, Ed, are they're being the surface water and the foul water are being separated, aren't they, in new developments?
Yes, Chair. So what we've been trying to do, well, since the adoption of the current local plan, is encourage sustainable drainage systems which capture surface water on site and make best use of that through storing it on site so that it can be held in a storm event rather than discharged with the main surface water to help to relieve pressures on the system, and then where possible held on site and used by trees planting within the site to minimise the surface water flows off the site. I think one of the things South West Water are investigating is to what extent those systems have been successful or possibly even correctly installed, in terms of whether that's contributing to the issues that they're experiencing or not. So I think there are some investigations going on into that, which they may well be able to tell you about.
That's what's loosely termed water attenuation schemes, isn't it?
Yes, it's all about dealing with flood risk and trying to minimise flood risk by controlling flows so that in the event of the storm, as much of surface water as possible is held back within sites and gradually discharged once the storm's passed.
Right, thank you, Ed. Who's next, Sarah? Please.
Sorry, Councillor Parr, then Councillor Bailey.
Thank you. Yes, Chairman, could we get some advice about having all these other bodies to attend? Because it seems to me to really focus our questioning, there is a huge amount to ask South West Water. There is a huge amount to ask the Environment Agency. And I think we should get advice as to the wisdom of having them at the same time, because I would have thought the meeting focused on South West Water and then separately the Environment Agency would be more effective.
I think that's a fair point, and it's something that I'm very conscious not wanting to detract from Jess's very focused proposal. So I'm just wondering if Jess, who is next to speak, would like to comment on that, and then I can put it to the committee. How wide do we want the invitation to go? Should it just be to South West Water? Should it be to South West Water and the Environment Agency? But I think in any event, because health is what we're concerned about, whoever else comes, I think our environmental health team, who are not a problem, should be present as well. Jess, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think I probably do agree with Councillor Parr. I think that I think we could probably, as between us, well, Eleanor, Councillor Rylance has 3 hours of questions, and I, probably do myself. So I don't know how feasible it is to have Environment Agency, and I worry about including too much detail about planning from Councillor Davey in this particular case. I think, and I also, although I'm sure Clinton Devon, at a later date, I do think that the primary focus should be on South West Water, our watercourses, and the impact on our coast. So I think it's probably preferable just to restrict it to them, but I'm open really. I think it's probably better.
Well, your proposal, Jess, I think that's a legitimate request, which I've got some sympathy with, and I've been thinking while I've been sitting here. The bathing water can be another thing, and in fact, because of the changing in people's habits who now swim all the year round, that might be a totally separate thing that this committee might want to get the Environment Agency to consider as a separate issue. Its normal beach monitoring and warning system to be a year-round activity as opposed to just summer. So split that away from your very specific case, and I think we'd benefit probably by dealing, although they are to some extent connected, perhaps wrongly connected, we can deal with them as two separate issues. It's a swimming thing, and they're just, I can see the sea from here, is what concerns me. So I take your point, Jess. So shall we, I will recommend or make a recommendation that we do ask South West Water to come to us at a special extraordinary meeting to answer questions with regard to the sewage contamination of our waterways. That's a fairly blunt proposal, but I think it covers all the points. Or would you like to add anything, Jess?
No, right. That sounds
good. I've never been one to waste words. So that's a proposal from the chair. So technically it doesn't need seconding. Am I right on that constitutionally? So can we have a vote that we do invite South West Water to appear before a special and extraordinary meeting of the scrutiny panel to investigate you got it there. You got it.
Sewerage contamination of our waterways.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So can we have a show of hands on that, please?
Thank you, Chair. The vote's underway. That's 9 green ticks, or 10 green ticks in favour, and no red crosses, no abstentions.
Thank you, Jess. Now, it's very nice to be considering a proposal which isn't navel gazing. So thank you very much indeed. Anyway, we now move on. Thank you very much. So the recommendation is clear. We now move on to Paul's proposal with regard to the honorary alderman, alderwoman, or older people. We were expecting a report from Sue Howell, which didn't arrive. But I know from talking to her that there's very much a mixed picture throughout the country. Some authorities do not have any form of such recognition. Some have it with a very formalised protocol for deciding to whom the awards should be given. And other authorities merely have an ad hoc arrangement. And in fact, there is no written down protocol that's ever applied within East Devon. So I think not just because of the dreadful events concerning the former Exmouth councillor. I hate to mention his name. I think it's quite right for this committee to ask that that be examined. The only thing I'm anxious about is that we don't waste time examining and trying to bring in a protocol if indeed the council's wishes, by this that I mean the whole council, are that they no longer see the relevance of such awards. Now, do you think it would be sensible to see if such awards are still required? And I think our democratic service officers, it must be getting late, could actually canvass the membership. And if the membership still wish to have some form of recognition, we should then ask that to be a formal structure, to some definition of what counts as meritorious conduct, how they can be removed, such things, but to actually get it on some formal situation where the council appoints a body, a representative body, to make such recommendations. Now, there's no great time pressures on this, because it's not until May 2023 such awards will be made again, but it's something I definitely want to see pursued. And I invite Paul, after Paul's finished, I'll invite the rest of the committee to comment on how they feel, whether we should canvass the council at first to see if this sort of scheme is still relevant and wanted, and if it is still relevant and wanted, then go on to see how that could be achieved in a more open and transparent way. Over to you, Paul. I hope I haven't stolen all your thunder.
No, thank you, Chair. So the motivation for this item came from Councillor Bailey, who spoke at the extraordinary full council meeting and questioned and asked the leader at the time, leader who's still the leader of the council, so I'm very tired, Councillor Arnott, to investigate this. I personally feel it is appropriate for the Scrutiny Committee to carry out that role. I know Councillor writes in his introductory remarks that there is no protocol, which really, really concerns me, that there is no existing protocol. So in the monitoring officer's comments, he suggests it's open for the committee to create a new protocol. Well, it seems to me there's no existing protocol, and therefore I slightly disagree with Councillor Wright's suggestion that we first decide whether we want them or not before looking into the nomination process from the last round of aldermen, because there were a large number of older persons that were put before a full council meeting. Many older people. I mean, just an example, Exeter City Council have only ever nominated 11 or so, maybe a few more in their history. And we nominated 11 in one term. That just seemed quite a lot of people who are meant to have in the legal sense of the word, provided eminent service to the district. I'm really concerned that we didn't have a protocol, and that's why I think it is worth going back and looking at what. Okay, so in an email to me, Chair, on the 27th of October, when you cancelled the last meeting, you assured me that there would be a report from Sue in this meeting. I think it's really important to understand, as this committee, how these older people were nominated, because it just seemed to be done in complete secret, and I think that's really worrying. And I think if we don't, I think I quote you actually. You said in the email to me, Chair, before we seek to change something, we should all be clear what the current situation is. Now, I don't think we know that completely yet, so I don't think I think it would be premature to just decide today, oh, we don't want aldermen at all. I think there's a and then close the matter. I think there's more to understand here. I think the public deserve to know how it works, and I'm afraid the victims of the crimes also know, because there are some major questions that certain councillors, I'm afraid, just haven't answered on this question, and they have had opportunities to answer them. You know, was it known by any councillor on this authority who nominated Mr. Humphreys? They have been asked whether a criminal investigation was ongoing when that nomination was made. And whilst I note the monitoring officer's comments about innocent until proven guilty, there's a world of difference between you know, somebody being asked to stand down from their role, their elected role, whilst under criminal investigation. But I think it's inappropriate, if it was ever known, for any councillor to be nominated for an honorary role, which sort of acts as a local knighthood in many ways, whilst such questions are to be answered. And I think there is a need for us to know whether there was any knowledge on that. And I would welcome any public statement made by a representative of the Conservative group or anybody else on that matter. I think it's important the public know about that either way. On reforming the system, this is why I welcome the report. There are many councils that have aldermen and older people, and there are some that don't. I know that I've heard arguments on both sides that it's a great way, when it's done properly, it's a great way of honouring genuine community service. I've seen examples across the country where there are clear protocols of how older people should be selected for nomination. I worry that our system in the past has been full of potential cronyism and done in total secrecy without any safeguards. I believe we need a thorough review of the previous round of nominations for honorary aldermen and how it was just sprung on full council with no information regarding the eminent service of the nominees, although it was obvious that a few of those who had made a truly outstanding contribution. So I think we need a report. Chair, you promised a report, and I'd like to propose that we have that report at the next meeting, and we also have a list of other versions of how this system works in other authorities. That will mean hopefully a fairly straightforward benchmarking exercise, I think, but we also need to look at ourselves very much, I think, as an authority. As I say, I think we owe the public that, and I think we owe the victims that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. You did mention that it's not right for this committee to decide we no longer want aldermen. That's not what I suggested. I totally agree with you. You can ask this committee could ask the monitoring officer to come forward and explain how the last decisions were made. That would be legitimate. But I think before we want to then revise or create a protocol, there's no point in creating a protocol for something which the council no longer wants to do. So there are two issues. The issue, as I see, that is most concerning you is actually how the decisions surrounding the last people awarded, or the people in the past have been decided that they get the award of the honorary alderman status in the past. That is one issue. And the other issue is going forward. And I think had it not been for the unfortunate or the horrific, scandalous affair of the councillor from Exmouth, this probably would not have raised itself. So what other councillors have we got wishing to speak, Sarah?
Councillor Chapman, followed by Councillor Parr.
Thank you. Mary?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I look forward to reading the report. I'm not aware how the aldermen were picked. I thought it was for long service. And to answer Councillor Miller, as a Conservative councillor for Exmouth, I was not aware of any misdemeanour by any councillor that I serve with on the town council or district council. But then I'm not a councillor that listens to tittle-tattle, and you do get tittle-tattle in any neighbourhood, but I never heard any tittle-tattle about that particular councillor. I was quite horrified when it came out. If I had known, I would have said something before, but I didn't know anything about it, which I can honestly state. And I look forward to seeing the report on the way forward. As I understood it, it was for long service, but I could be wrong. Thank you, Chair.
I think you highlight the problem there, Maddie. Nobody knows what they were for. Who's next? Helen Parr, I understand. Is my memory right?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I would like us to wait for the report on this matter. For instance, I'd like to see a list of recently appointed aldermen, because as to this allegation that there's cronyism, I'd like to see some evidence of that. And the particular worry about the councillor from Exmouth, I take on board seriously the comments of the monitoring officer about whether anyone could have known officially about investigations or anything else. As far as that goes, I think it's in doubt. So I do think we should wait for a report around this whole matter before we look at it.
Who's next, Sarah?
Councillor Armstrong next.
Welcome, Megan.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Just a very brief, I just wanted to really back up what Councillor Chapman's just said. I've always got the impression, I've always had the impression in the last 6.5, 7 years, that it was for long service. That's the impression I've always had, but I've not seen anything written down about that anywhere. But that's just what I've always thought. It's about long service. But apart from that, I don't know what other criteria, if any, were used. But I just wanted to back up what Councillor Chapman said, really, because that was my impression too. Thank you.
That was my impression as well, actually. And
yeah,
I take Helen's point that perhaps a list of who has received in the past would give us some indication of how it was awarded. I suppose I should express it's not a prejudicial interest, I don't hope, but in 2023, I'll have completed 12 years now. As things do stand, I might have been in line for a car park in the past, but I think we can forego that. I'm not trying to belittle it, because I think it's a very serious thing. Megan and Maddie both say they were unaware, and Maddie's a considerably more experienced councillor than I am. So is it the first thing you would request, Paul, is a report now as promised, which we haven't had, on how the system has run in the past? And I think Helen's idea that we have if you like, a rogues gallery of who has been awarded this and who hasn't, so that we can look to see if there's any bias one way or the other. And I still, I don't want to, but I still think there's merit in when we've got that report. I'm not saying that's one issue. Get the report on what's happened in the past. And then I think then before we want to devise a protocol going forward, we should see if it's something council still wants. And there'd be a very easy system of doing that. A straw poll or a poll organised.
Thanks, Chair. I did make very clear in my recommendation that I wanted to see, whilst there was no protocol, I wanted to see how these aldermen came to be before the council, who nominated them, how if there's no protocol, how did it happen? Were there a few phone calls?
And I take your point on that, and that's what we can quite properly ask the monitoring officer. And it would have been the chairman of the council. I thought that perhaps the leaders of the various groups got together and made their nominations, because my experience in the past, there has been a political spread. I remember last time it was Trevor Cope, Pat Graham, someone else, certainly a proportion that would not.
Last time, 8 out of 11 were Conservatives, and I know a lot of Conservatives lost their seat, but it is something to look into.
Yeah,
the process, and also protocols from other areas. I'll end it there, but I just wanted to make my recommendations very clear.
Right. Any other speakers?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Davey, Councillor Gardner, and Councillor Armstrong.
Right, in that order, please. You're coming back again, Megan?
Yeah.
Ollie first.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I feel somewhat tarnished by the reference to the councillor from Exmouth, I must say. Yeah, I find Voldemort a very useful name in these circumstances, he whose name cannot be mentioned. There's a former head teacher I had who I refer to by that name as well. But I just wanted to say that if the monitoring officer could spell out the options for us, then I think it would make the report focused and clear and help to guide our discussion if we knew what the options were. One obviously is to abolish the whole system, and the other would be to suggest what the protocols might be going forward. But I take Councillor Miller's point that we want to know what happened in the past as well, and how the system was run. But I think to get something useful out of this, it would be good to see what our options are going forward. If we're going to retain this honour, then let's be much more clear about it, and let's see what options and models there are out there. Thank you.
And who said Megan? Was Megan next?
Me.
Councillor Gardner.
Sorry. The trouble is that the people who appear on my screen are at the top, where their yellow hand would be, in fact, is a toolbar, so I can't see hands at the top of the screen, I'm afraid.
I obviously support Councillor Miller's suggestion for doing this work. I think the fact that we found ourselves having fairly recently awarded honorary alderman status to someone who was under such severe and serious criminal investigation and ultimately conviction was absolutely appalling and shocking. And I think the public and the victims and their families deserve to understand something about the process by which he was awarded that honour. I definitely want to know who nominated him, what discussions there were, who was asked. I would definitely hope that those people involved could step forward and swear that they knew absolutely nothing about what was going on, because it was under investigation for a long time. So I think understanding what happened in the past is important. It has always struck me in my time on the council that it's been something done behind closed doors by the leading party or the party in control of the council, based on cronyism, whatever, I don't know, but there never seemed to be any logic behind those people being nominated. We were just expected to vote them through, and I have to say I don't think I ever did. I think I avoided it because I didn't agree with some of them and I couldn't therefore give my backing. So I think the second part of this is absolutely essential, and it's long overdue. I know that in my group we've discussed the issue of aldermen ages ago, saying that we thought it was an anachronism, potentially should be abolished anyway. And if we are going to keep it, it should definitely be something that is very, very special and has a really clear process so that the public understand too. We can't be too strict about the criteria because every councillor is different in what they do for the ward, for the amount of time they're on the council, who they are and everything else. But I think we do need to make this process, really as transparent as possible. I don't ever want to think, I'm sure we will never be in the situation that we've been in again. That would be unbelievable. But I think we can do an awful lot better than we have. At the moment, we've got a lot of honorary aldermen that we don't really know why. I think a lot of the people in their wards don't necessarily understand why they've given it either. And I think we've got to review it really properly, but not bogging ourselves down in too much detail. Thanks.
Absolutely. And now, Megan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, just to go back on what I said earlier, I do agree. Yes, there should be a report about what's gone on in the past and how it's all been done in the past. But from the speakers I've just heard, if it was just about, and I'm not sure whether it was, about length of service, that speaks for itself, doesn't it? My understanding is that a councillor was retiring, was no longer going to be a councillor, And because of their length of that, so that's one thing. And because of their length of service, they were entitled then to become an older person. That's my understanding of it. Now, to me, that's fairly straightforward. You know, that's the criteria. That could have been the criteria. But who knows? I can see Councillor Gardner there. Yeah, we don't know. That's the issue, isn't it? But that's what I've always. And if that was the case, that makes sense to me. Somebody's retiring. They've done what, 12 years service minimum, whatever it is, and therefore they're put forward. Whatever colour, whatever shape, whatever, you know, whatever political persuasion they are. And that's how I've always understood it. And obviously, certainly in the past, I've not necessarily agreed with some of the names that have been put forward. But that's personal choice, really, whether you agree with something or not. But it would be good just to have it looked at. I do agree with that, and just to examine exactly how it's gone on in the past, and what the chair's already said, that we look at whether we want this to continue in future before we start making a new protocol. I think that's the right way around of doing it myself.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks.
I merely thought it was. Sorry, Sarah, am I interrupting anybody else?
Councillor Arnott has his hand up, and Councillor Sarah Jackson.
Right, Paul, then Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. The person in question was arrested in 2015 on bail from 2016. Papers were passed to the Crown Prosecution Service in February 2017, which then were processed in June 2017. The person in question knew that he was certain to come to criminal court to face those charges, and I believe it was June or July 2021 when this came through. I'm just giving you that there as information with no further comment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Paul. And then Sarah, did you say Sarah?
Yes, Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Only a couple of points, really. I did look at the number of honorary aldermen at some of our neighbouring councils, at both county and district level, as well as some from elsewhere in the country, and there is a real diversity in terms of the volume of aldermen that are currently present for any one authority. And I will say some were much better at publishing those and making them available for viewing than others. Some made them really, really clear and easy to find, and others I couldn't find them at all. And I couldn't find them on our own website, although it may be that they're there, but they're just not picked up in the search functions. But I understand that we have quite a few as an authority. So there's clearly something worth looking into there. My only suggestion to you is, if you're looking at options to come forward in a report around the protocol for appointment, that you also consider what the process is should they need to be removed at any point, because that's something else that I established previously when the discussion first came up around removal of the aldermanship from former Councillor Humphreys, was that some authorities have a process in place, and that there wasn't much in the primary legislation that actually covered that. So it's worth having a process, even if you never have to use it. That's all I really have to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Before I sum up, Sarah, is there anybody else?
Just Councillor Miller.
Paul?
Thanks, Chair. Sorry about that. I just wanted to clarify on this issue of length of service. It would be I think it would be very dangerous if we were to continue this and just on I think I read it was 8 years, not 12 years, but however many years it is, to consider it exclusively on length of service, because we'd end up with quite a lot of aldermen within the district. It's length of service isn't the only legal qualification. The other one is to have made an eminent contribution from what I've read from reports. The issue with the word eminent is it's vague, but I just think I'd like to move now that we have the vote and we just get the report, because that will explain in more detail. And I wish we'd had it this evening, to be honest, as you wanted it to be here this evening, as did I. So,
Chair, shall I assist you with some of the wording I've captured?
Yeah, but if we want a specific report covering specific, hang on. I think I'm just going down. We need to be specific in what we want that report to cover. So I totally agree with you, Paul. We want a report as to how in the past people have been selected, what criteria, on whose recommendation, what does eminent or meritorious conduct include, and also a breakdown by party and qualification of those who've received it in, say, the last 12 years, because that should be easy there. And I, from my experiences, I've been a councillor now for nearly 12 years, is that if you get 12 years in, you get the gong. And that's, to be crude, that's what I've interpreted it as. So if you're happy with that, we need the report, we need it timely. Yeah. But,
thanks, Chair.
And then on the basis of that report might be something we then put to the council to see if councillors want it to continue. But I want to see that report before we then put that option to the council, because depending on what that report says might colour what council's opinion is on whether we want to continue it or not. Is that all right, Anita?
Yes, the only thing I've got in addition to those points you've raised that members had mentioned was that the report should suggest options for the future, including processes for granting and removal of the honour, and including referenced protocols from other areas.
That's fine.
The other bits that I picked up.
Yeah.
Sarah, have you got the gist of that together?
Yes, I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right, I think that's been a very wide-ranging and good discussion. I'm sorry that the meeting's gone on so long. There's just one other thing of some urgency.
Sorry, Chair, just need to vote on that.
Oh, sorry. I was seeing I was looking at all the nodding head.
So proposed from the chair, presumably, so no need for a seconder. Go with your votes.
And the vote's underway. Chair, there are 11 green crosses, no red ticks and no abstentions.
Thank you very much. Now, before we close, there's another pressing issue. Some time ago, this committee recommended the setting up of a TAF to investigate car parking charges. Nothing has come from that TAF. I think it last met in March. And time is of the essence, because come February, the budget will have to be set, and car parking income or projected car parking income is a vital part of that, because it's a major contribution to our finances. I think Overview Committee, and perhaps this project should have gone to Overview instead of Scrutiny, made a wonderful job of dealing with the very thorny, sensitive issue of toilets. Now, we might not agree with the outcome, but no one can, I think, argue with the way it was done. And that decision will be going from Cabinet to Council. And I'm just wondering whether, in order to get something done, we actually put the responsibility on forming this policy, having had relevant reports from officers. I've tried to speak to the relevant officer and he hasn't returned my phone calls. that we now put it back to Cabinet to resolve it, because it is a matter of leadership concern. It is a leading strategy, our car parking strategy, a very eminent, very important strategy. And I think TAFs, in my experience, have been the equivalent of kicking things into the long grass, and I don't want that to continue. So I can't ask for a vote because it wasn't on the agenda. But I'm just wondering, and I would try and take it up with Henry, how, if Cabinet was to decide to take that back in-house because there's been no progress, what would be the view of this committee? Kathy?
I'm waving because you can't see the yellow hand.
No, that's right, yeah. I saw it.
It's interesting that you've raised this tonight, because I was wondering about this several weeks ago. I was thinking, what on earth are we doing with the budget and, you know, our dire financial situation, because we haven't sorted out the car park issue.
I must warn you, I'm getting a red line, so there might be some delay. You carry on, Kathy, not because I'm not interested. I will close this down, and if somebody be on the guard, I'll be trying to come back in on my East Devon iPad, which has got more battery in it. Okay. Is that all right? I'm not ignoring what you're saying, but it's just technology means that I'll be deaf for about 5 minutes. All right.
I'm not taking that personally. I do also think this is a matter of absolute urgency now. I don't want to criticise the TAF at all, because of course there's something like the pandemic, I think, really got in the way of the TAF completing its task. And also it was a massive job with every single member with a car park in their ward wanting their say, lots of different ideas. So I think it really urgently now needs to be pushed on, because we can't go through the next budget cycle without having sorted that out. So I definitely support anything that the chair wishes to do in recommending that this matter is passed back to Cabinet. There's been a lot of input from everybody already, so I hope nobody feels that they've missed out. But you know, it did start off quite a long time ago, so I actually support that idea.
Oh, I'll chair, shall I? Councillor Miller has his hand up as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth sort of reminding ourselves, because the chair mentioned that he suggested we do have a car parking. We don't actually have a strategy, which was why the TAF was set up in the first place. But sadly, I think the TAF was set up through the wrong reporting to the wrong committee, because never having had a car parking strategy, you know, scrutiny is about looking back. So it should really have gone, it really should have, and I think Councillor Wright alluded to this, it really should have been on the work programme or going through overview. I do also share from experience, his comments about TAFs in a way. I mean, you know, we've got a lot of meeting groups at this council, and I think it does put a great strain on democratic services. I'm not complete. I mean, there are constitutional issues, I think, to go through. I obviously welcome Cabinet being the ultimate decision maker when it comes to this strategic issue. I think that's correct within the constitution we have. And I wanted to sort of remind councillors who remember my motion from nearly 2 years ago, which was to take it out of Cabinet control. I think it's worth me stressing that was based on the circumstances of the administration at the time, who played a game of bingo when it came to, when it came to deciding charges. And I think the Cabinet now actually discuss things before going into a room, which is a very healthy thing. So whilst I do agree that the Cabinet should be the ultimate decision maker, I do also think that overview ought to be consulted in some way. I think that really did work with the public toilets situation. So I do think it should go to Cabinet, and I think Cabinet should be the decision makers over it. But I would be very grateful if the Cabinet, through the leader, I know the leader's present, if he would allow the overview committee to at least have a consultative role, as they did with the public toilets, not in a way, by the way, that would delay things. I just think that the process we went through with the toilets was a very healthy one, and it led to less parochialism at Cabinet, actually. There was some, but I think it was worth going through that two-stage process. So I agree that it shouldn't be at scrutiny anymore. So I agree with you there, Chair. I just also think there is that wider member engagement that still needs to take place. And Cabinet is only 10 councillors. Councillors outside the Cabinet might be able to speak on it, but it's very difficult to feel involved. So that would be my comment on it. Thank you.
I am back with you now.
Councillor Davey, then Councillor Arnott, Chair.
Well done, Ollie.
I've got the hang of it now. All I've got to do is wave. Yes, just to say, as a member of that TAF, I thought we actually did some very useful work there. And a recommendation was made, which I think ultimately went to full council, and it was agreed that we were going to raise car parking charges, but we also agreed to defer it for a year as we came out of the pandemic. Well, we thought we'd be out of the pandemic, but as I understand it, the agreement has been made to raise car parking charges, so I'm not sure that the budget implications are there, but I would certainly welcome that TAF meeting again, because I want to get on with looking at developing camper van sites, particularly in Exmouth, which is my patch, but I would hope that would form a model for other potential sites as well, because I think there's huge possibilities there. So I certainly welcome it meeting again, but I think that there was a resolution, and that it is known what will happen when we get to the new budget year.
Thank you. On the camper vans, I remember when they were first mooted that there was agreement that we will explore and set up camper vans, which has happened at the mayor. You know, the same thing could be true of Limekiln car park. But I think one of the problems is we're looking at car parks in isolation. What we want is a strategy similar with the toilets, where car parks are categorized. You know, some car parks serve different purposes. We've got car parks in town centres, which are absolutely vital to the economic health of the town. We've got car parks like the massive one at Mere, the massive one down here. I know you'd rather people didn't drive to town, Ollie. I saw your nodding head there. I can tell you I'm all electric. You know, we got the massive car park down here. And I know the people come there, they bring their picnics, they go onto the beach, they get back in their cars and go home. So there are different car parks. And I just think it's timing. We don't meet again now till the end of February, because our next meeting is the joint overview, scrutiny, budget setting. And I think to give our financial officer, our 151 officer, a better chance of getting things right for the budget going forward, this should be resolved. And I think the only way it is going to be resolved quickly is for Cabinet to bite the bullet. People will have a chance to talk. Cabinet can then put it to council where everybody can vote on it. But it actually will be finalised, because you say it's been hanging about since that, was it in June 2019, where figures were being pulled out of the hat at that Cabinet meeting. And, you know, I thought, well, we're not going to get anywhere with this. So I don't want to deny scrutiny its role, but I think it should not have been scrutiny, it should have been overview. And I also think that we do now need to get it done. Yeah, anyway.
Councillor Arnott, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to thank you for looking at the realities that we are facing as a council at the moment. And if scrutiny is minded to follow your advice, Cabinet would be most grateful. I know RS 151 officer would as well. I think 3 very quick comments. First of all, genuinely to thank the TAF for all the work that it's done. I just sat lingering in the background for many of the meetings. Particularly like to pay tribute to Councillor Val Ranger, who did so much, you know, within that scrutiny context on driving that through. and Councillor Colin Brown, who was chairing that first part of the process. We are where we are. There have been delays caused by many things, the pandemic not the least. The second thing I'd like to say is that, taking Councillor Miller's point, if scrutiny were so minded, as you say, I think there isn't an opportunity for a decision tonight. Tom, you're just looking for, you're taking soundings really. It does seem like a good idea if there's a role for overview, if the chair of overview can squeeze in an extra meeting somehow, which would have to be very early January indeed. So we might then have, because I really agree, I think that the lavatories process was a real model of how to do it, and it really shouldn't be just as Paul has said, 10 people deciding this. It needs to be as many, and of course 60 can attend overview one way or the other and speak as they can at cabinet, of course. So that seems like a helpful idea if that can be sorted out. I mean, I'm mindful we've got about 6 working weeks to get our budget together for next year. And I think then, going to Ollie's point as well, it is absolutely right that a very helpful decision was made, even though we decided to leave it and defer it by a year, to increase that one range of charges. But that's a very limited number of our car parks, actually. And we really do need to look at the other ones as well as fast as possible, just to see what the possibilities are there. So that's my Haypeth, Chair. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you, Paul. I see Val's got her yellow hand raised and then Colin. Is it Val, then Colin, Sarah?
Yes, it is, Chair.
Yeah.
Val?
Yeah, if you can hear me.
Yep. Loud and clear.
We proposed that, and that's coming to fruition, and also the eco bikes, which I think are also come.
You've gone, Val.
Came out of TAF. So in the electric hookups came out of TAF. Finding people.
Councillor Ranger, we're getting the first couple of words. I know we don't normally take things in the chat. I wonder if you just want to, if you can, pop your words into the chat and then I'll pick them up. Sorry, we get the first couple of words and then you disappear. Chair, do you want to move to Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I'd just like to back up Councillor Ollie Davey. There were recommendations made to full council, one of which I believe was taken up and the others were deferred until the following year. The TAF got as far as doing most things except for camper vans, and we spoke on electric charging points, but I don't know whether we're capable of doing the electric charging points, because as Tom rightly knows, being that he's got an electric vehicle, charging points can only go up to I think it's 7 kilowatts on a normal type of charging point, which are only single phase. You need 3 phase to get anything more powerful than that, and I don't know whether our car parks are capable of taking 3 phase. So that will be something, one of the officers will have to let us know. But, like I said, recommendations were made and they were deferred until the following year. Thank you.
I can speak a bit on the phasing. The thing is that's for us with regard to our car parks, but there are many companies who are willing to invest in laying the extra couple of cables to put the super fast cables. I charged at a service area on the M4 last week and I put 150 miles in my car in just over 20 minutes. So it is possible. And in fact, I think there's more people coming on board now to invest in the necessary wiring, which is all it is, to get the 3-phase power to different locations. Anyway,
I mean, they've got three-phase power 303 on the A30, but they do charge you a premium for that one. I mean, they're charging 75p a kilowatt.
I paid 30p at the service area.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Which means there's scope for East Devon.
Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Ranger's comment is on the chat. Shall I read that for you? Save everybody, just so it's not, if I read it, then it's on the record. Just a reminder that electric hookups and eco bikes from the TAF, which are coming forward, that came from the TAF. So I think that's picking up that same car parking electric hookup point. And I know from a legal perspective, there are 2, perhaps 3, slightly lost track projects that Andrew Ennis is running to put electric charging points in various EDDC car parks. I imagine they've probably been to council, but certainly there are a couple of projects around that are ongoing. Councillor Miller has his hand up, Chair.
Thank you. Go on, Paul.
I don't see why we can't make a recommendation on this item. Is there any reason why we can't? Because we need to recommend this, the responsibility for car parking, which council had decided was a matter for council, needs to be returned predominantly to cabinet, ideally with overview as a consultee if it can arrange an extraordinary meeting. It's difficult to come up with a recommendation as such, but I do feel even if it's in the minutes, we need to be clear about what and that's with all the great thanks to the work of the Scrutiny car park staff. But I think we just need to all decide that we're happy to take it off our agenda, put it on cabinets.
I have taken a little bit of advice, and because it wasn't formally on the agenda, democratically, because it then denies other people to come to speak on that subject, we can't make a decision. What I think we can do would indicate how we would make a decision in other circumstances, which would give an indication to cabinet, give it some confidence to proceed on the basis that they can expect an outcome at a subsequent meeting. But it means in the meantime they can do what is necessary to carry it forward. Am I right on that, Anita?
Yes, Chair, and I was going to suggest you need to approve the forward plan, which is still on this agenda. Whether you note the forward plan, but cover off your discussion within that narrative. So the committee notes the forward plan and would suggest that, and then whatever wording you want to suggest. It's not within your gift to take this matter out of council's remit. That would have to be, currently there is no car parking strategy, so it does sit within council. So that would ultimately have to be, unless I've misunderstood, that would have to be a decision of council, but you could certainly ask Chair of Overview if they were prepared to look at it. But wrap that up in the narrative of approving the forward plan, perhaps.
That's very wise, and presumably cabinet can put it to council. Cabinet can propose a strategy to council.
They could do.
So can I have an indication? I suppose it could be a vote, which would just be an indication, not a vote on which we're taking any particular action, on how the committee feels about handing this back to cabinet to get it done so that we can go into the next budget on a more sound footing. That might not be at all democratic, but I've never been a one for process, which is probably why I'm in the wrong job, but there we are. So I'll give a tick to that.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors are indicating their support. We've got 8 green ticks, 9 green ticks.
So can we stretch democracy further, perhaps, and suggest that do you want to review the Chair, do you want to review the forward plan separately, and then we'll add some wording that says members discussed that they wish to refer so we're referring the car parking TAF. Are we referring it back to Cabinet or back to Overview? What is it that?
I think to Cabinet, who might then ask Overview to look at it.
Okay, that's fine. And that was what you said just now. So that was the wording. So perhaps if we, sorry, I'm taking over your meeting, Chair, but if we move to the forward plan.
I'm glad someone is.
It's getting to that time, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can review the forward plan and then in the minutes we can cover off the discussion regarding the TAF. Does that work for you, Sarah?
There's a smile, so I suspect it does.
Yes, thank you.
You couldn't play poker, Sarah. I'm trying to think what there is in the local plan. The only thing that's forward at the moment is the December 21 recommendation from strategic planning about the 56-day temporary site. I think that was kicked into touch, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. So the forward plan is item 12, I think.
Yeah, I've got that. I've got it in front of me. Yeah, I've got it here.
Basically, it provided an update of what had happened to previous proposal forms.
That's right.
That was requested at the last meeting, so that forms the top part of the forward plan.
And the only thing on this at the moment is the local plan. Good. Report to be considered local plan sites, allocation to delivery. We haven't really dealt with that, have we?
No, you did that at this meeting. So that was basically to track where all of those proposal forms had gone. So for the committee to note that.
So do we put on it the Jess Bailey's work on the forward plan? Jess Bailey's work and Paul's proposal for the investigation into the allocation of honours to retiring councillors.
Yes.
I hope that we may be able to convene that meeting as soon as possible. Thank you.
We'll be in the hands of South West Water to some extent, Jess, but we will, you know, it's got to be done and it's got to be done quickly.
So if you're happy to note, if the committee's happy to note that forward plan, Chair.
Note that forward plan. And then we thank the TAF for their work, which has had significant achievements with regard to camper vans and electric charging points and the scooters. But we need some urgency with regard to formulating a car parking strategy for the approval of council, and time constraints mean that that is probably better served by going to cabinet. Is that, or was that totally democratically unallowed? Sorry, you're muted.
That's the first time I said we've done it, Chair. So I think it's not entirely orthodox, but I think it allows something that can be taken forward, and we can refer it to Henry and see how he wants to deal with that. But at least it puts forward the view of scrutiny that it does perhaps need to go somewhere else and it needs to be expedited.
Thank you very much. And so that's the end of the meeting. I'd like to thank all the councillors for what is an exceptionally long meeting for me. But we've covered quite a bit of ground. There's been good wide-ranging comments on most of the topics, and I think we've reached a reasonable agreement and harmony. And is it too soon to wish you all a very happy Christmas? Because we don't meet again till January. I'm certain we will be meeting in other venues, but thank you very much. Thank you very much again for all your efforts.